Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2021 IT Summit for the Architecture and Engineering Industry. Today's event is being hosted by AbleOne in collaboration with and with sponsorship from Lenovo, Microsoft, Veeam, and Zerto. A thank you to all of our contributors to today's event. With these introductory remarks complete, it's my pleasure to introduce to you the first speaker for today, Mr. Mark Ciprietti, President of AbleOne. Mr. Ciprietti is an IT industry veteran and former global business leader. Today, he will speak briefly about how the IT industry is evolving to the new normal as we emerge from the pandemic. Mr. Ciprietti, over to you.
Thanks, Melanie. The formality, it's Mark, and you know that. Melanie, just a quick thing. I don't see the presentation on my screen. I only see thanks for using Cisco WebEx, so I'm not sure if everyone else has that challenge, but I will leave that with you, and I will start. And I think to echo Melanie's comments, I want to take the time to welcome everyone this morning. I know you all have choice out of your busy schedules, and I thank you for being here with us. And to echo Melanie, also, I want to thank the partner community that's here representing us, because without their strong partnerships, we can't do the work we're doing. Next slide. Let me just give you a brief overview.
Sorry, yeah. One moment. Can you see the presentation?
No.
No. Okay. I think I got a chat in from some others that they can see the presentation,
okay,
so it might just
perfect.
be more.
Then right, I've got a few slides, and you'll know when to change them. Let me just give you a brief introduction. Table one, we're an IT solutions provider based out of Kitchener, Ontario. We have a reputation for over 30 years of helping small to medium-sized businesses across Canada. And in those 30 years, I can attest we've had to transform ourselves. We've had to transform our offerings and how we engage with our valued clients as their needs have changed. And utilizing technology to help keep them competitive in their markets, and using technology solutions to provide really an exceptional experience with their clients. And I've always said to our team, if you can understand your client's client, then you're adding value. And value is really being able to provide offerings that make our clients more productive, which really translates into profit, or introducing technology solutions that will save them money, and that's really cost containing. And how our clients wish to procure and use technology has changed. More so today with the advent of what I'll call the cloud, and over the past year, all of us moving to some type of work from home. We really pride ourselves on being both a consultant and a solution provider. And when I look at Melanie's screen there, she talks about 100 years of experience. I think she looks to me as the seasoned individual that has over 35 years in IT. So when I started my career, IBM wasn't even in the business of the PC business. And what we're trying to do now is really help our clients from everything from procuring technology, to deciding on where that technology resides, to managing and securing that technology. And we help businesses with their full spectrum of technology needs. Next slide, Melanie. I'd like to talk for a moment about where we are, because COVID changed my world in IT, and I know it changed your world from an architecture and engineering perspective. For your industry especially, the pandemic has disrupted how your teams are used to working. Your teams left the office. For many of you, for the first time. According to IDC, and you will get a few reports in the digital loop bag that's coming, IDC is International Data Corporation. Pre-COVID, 25% were working from home. In June, 60% of individuals were working from home. And I don't need to tell you how unprecedented that leap was. Your teams had to figure out how to work together virtually. You had to collaborate more and more, and you had to find ways of doing your work without printouts and physical markups. And we know from our clients in the industry that this was not easy. To cope, businesses needed new technologies, some in haste, some with free trials, and that really left you to transition to full agreements. And as a result, coping, businesses opened themselves up to new vulnerabilities. Employees using their own devices, employees working outside your secure network, employees bringing in new applications, everyone reacting very quickly to run their business and we've run into new risks, and that most weren't prepared for and haven't adequately dealt with. Now, as we emerge from the pandemic, employee expectation has shifted. IDC Canada has predicted over 40% will continue to work from home. We're hearing stories of businesses calling employees back to the office already. But make no mistake, there is a shift in how employees want to work that businesses will need to respond to. In this morning's paper from a BDC, so Business Development Canada article, 74% of businesses want remote work options, and 55% of employees wish remote work. So that's an increase of 15%. And with that in mind, businesses are reconsidering their physical office space and the technology that supports their business. And of course, every organization today is fixated on preparedness and flexibility and really around agility. And I've heard, as I've crisscrossed, the geography, zooming in with many customers, they're shifting and increasing their spend on the agility focused initiatives. And that is an increase in their spend on top of their IT spend of approximately 30%. Next slide, please. So how is technology evolving to help businesses in the new normal? There are really three trends I want to talk about, and you'll hear today from subject matter experts around these arenas. One, hybrid cloud. We've all heard about cloud. Everything was about the cloud a few years ago, and a lot of businesses rushed to the cloud to save money. But was there true savings? There was a move to right-size the environment and to become more agile. However, many businesses were left behind due to security and regulatory requirements. They'd already sunk capital into technology investments. There was performance requirements and limitations on really what the cloud could do for them. While we still hear a lot about cloud, I believe the new world will be a hybrid cloud. And really it's really about your data and where that data resides. And I believe we will emerge with a solution that provides cloud with some type of on-prem infrastructure, depending on where you want to keep your IP, which is your data close, and that what delivers the best of both worlds. We will hear more about this during the presentation. Secondly, we hear of everything as a service. It's everywhere these days, to the point where some are feeling subscription fatigue. And it's important to remember fundamentals of as a service. It turns large upfront investment into recurring fees. This is a good thing, especially for business. Capital expenditures are turned into operating expenses. You preserve your capital upfront to invest elsewhere. You see a reliable expense that makes budgeting and planning easier. You add some flexibility to your business to modify or cancel those subscriptions. These are good fundamentals, and that's why you're seeing as a service on many IT solutions these days. And the technology industry is adopting this model to make their solutions more accessible. These solutions break down barriers and they give you flexibility. And finally, I want to talk about protection or security. IDC Canada shared that 19% of businesses have reported an increase in security incidents since the start of the pandemic. Security has been in the top 3 IT priorities of business executives for the last number of years, and it is not going away. There's new security solutions are coming to market constantly, and artificial intelligence to predict and prevent attacks is becoming a key player in the fight. And you'll hear more and more about this as we address protection during our keynote. I'm excited to listen from Ken Muir this morning. The bad guys or the bad actors are very sophisticated, and they are using technology to their advantage. These 3 emerging areas of IT right now that I would recommend you bring back into your organizations to make your IT work for you and to work better for your business. And with that, I'll pass it back to Melanie. Thanks, Mel.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing those fantastic insights. It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker and our next session today. So we understand that everybody has a difficult time navigating the world of technology, what equipment to buy for your team, and knowing what to do about that is difficult, especially when you need to think through what you need to run sophisticated software like CAD and Revit, especially in your industry. So to help shed some light on these decisions and maybe give us a peek at some cutting edge technologies, today we have Christopher Rufo from Lenovo. Christopher is the AEC, the Architecture, Engineering, and Construction segment lead at Lenovo. It's my pleasure to introduce him today. And Chris, over to you.
So thank you, Melanie. And it was great to have Mark's introduction, because I'm going to pick up on a lot of the themes that he's talked about, although through a slightly different lens, through the lens of the ever-evolving BIM ecosystem and how new technology is emerging to help expand what's possible for the built environment and what that means from a technology selection point of view. So I work in the workstation group, and we're a small group who builds hardware, technology, workstations, mobile, desktop, peripherals, etc., to support the AEC sector. And I often forget how big Lenovo is as a corporate entity. Lenovo is the #1 PC manufacturer in the world, 50 billion in sales, 55,000 people, 160 countries. It's truly we're a nation unto our own, but we're in the workstation group a small part of a very large community. It's very exciting to be part of the team. So I'm going to talk about up and coming tech. We call it mega trends in AEC. We're going to talk about these trends and how they relate to workstation IT requirements, what you need to think about as you're purchasing a workstation and integrating it within your organization. So let's have a look at some of these trends. In the last decade, BIM has become widespread, but new and emerging technology over the last few years is really expanding what's possible with BIM. And the new normal that we've gone through for the last 18 months has really forced the industry to rethink our work anywhere and virtual collaboration strategies. So you're going to see a lot of technology and trends here that's changing or evolving BIM, from pro visualization to mobility to digital fab, reality capture, IoT and smart buildings, often referred to building digital twins. There are lots of things that are happening in the industry that are evolving the core fundamental of BIM. So let's take a look at some of these individually. So mobility is the new norm. I think Mark picked up on that immediately. Our world has changed over the last 18 months. And when the pandemic hit, we had a few options. A lot of us grabbed our mobile workstations, closed the lid, and went home, and then figured it out from there. Some folks went back to the office, grabbed their desktop, brought it home. But it's important to note that up to 62% of the employees that we've been talking about over the pandemic will remain working at home. And I think that's fairly close to the figure that Mark quoted a few moments ago. We've seen an increase in cybersecurity. So it's interesting that we hadn't seen each other's presentations before this, but we are picking up on the same themes. These are real fundamental issues that the industry is dealing with. Lenovo has a very robust ecosystem of tools, both hardware and software, to help protect you, from diagnostics to ThinkShield to partners like Intel that allow for secure access to one's hardware, to the ability to have zero-touch installation. These are very, very value-add services. So, in addition to just the fundamental fact of people remaining and working at home, there's a variety of things that we need to consider. How do we remain productive at home? And if we look at what's on an architect or an engineer or designer's desktop in the office, we see a lot of those pieces of hardware migrating to the home office. The first thing is dual monitors. If you're running Revit, running with 2 monitors makes one's life a lot easier. But we're also seeing people, who do have to go to the job site grabbing a tablet, that's connected to the cloud, that connects, BIM 360 to what you're working on your desktop. We're seeing increased use of VR headsets for virtual collaboration. We're seeing increased use of peripherals, special 3D mice connection peripherals that allow you to work more comfortably in CAD. Headphones with active noise cancellation to deal with domestic distractions. So the home office is becoming a very busy place, and helping users navigate which solutions are best for them is one of the challenges as we continue into this new normal of work anywhere. Part of that work anywhere new normal has created a whole slew of new requirements from a technology perspective for end users that you may not think about on a day-to-day basis, but we do. We've spoken to hundreds, probably thousands of customers over the last year and asked them what their biggest challenges are. Number one big challenge, of course, is the internet and bandwidth and VPN bottlenecks. Now, we can't fix the internet at Lenovo, but there are other issues that are very, very, very important to end users. When we talk about vision displays, comfort and usability, connectivity, virtual communication are very, very, very important. We will see, in fact, we just announced yesterday a new mobile workstations, the P1, P15, et cetera, that you'll hear about later today in the virtual booth. But we're seeing increased color resolution, increased display resolution, increased connectivity through Thunderbolt and USB-C. We're seeing increased eye comfort, low blue light displays, the ability to partition one's desktop more effectively. So a lot of the feedback that we've been getting over the last 18 months is now actually making it into real physical product. I'm very excited about some of these. Now, one of the challenges of working with remote is collaboration. And we've seen one of three scenarios. People would grab their mobile workstation, head home. People would try and connect back to the office with that mobile workstation into a rack workstation or desktop workstation. Some people would go back to the office, bring their desktop workstation home. So regardless, the fundamental challenge that architects, designers, and engineers are dealing with is, how do I connect back to the office in a secure manner, back to the either my virtual cloud or data center or on-prem or wherever my data is stored? How do I collaborate effectively? One of the things that we've brought to market with our partner, Mechdyne, who delivers TGX, is a very powerful one-to-one connection between a mobile workstation that is an NVIDIA graphics board and a desktop workstation or rack workstation back in the office. So since the pixels are streaming, it's completely 100% secure. Your data is back in the office, behind your firewall, or in the cloud, or in your on-prem data center. And through the TGX software, it's very, very low latency. So what you're experiencing on your mobile workstation is what you would experience if you were back in the office. And the added bonus is that you can connect to a rack workstation, or a desktop workstation would allow you to do more powerful workflows than you could actually do on your mobile workstation, whether it's simulation, high-end rendering, reality capture, etc. So, visit the Lenovo booth with Able One. Our tech experts can help you through some of the solutions here that are required for this one-to-one connection. The industry is also coming to terms with virtualization, and Lenovo is working very hard on solutions that will allow you to connect mobile workstations back to rack workstations or desktop workstations that will give you a powerful CAD experience. So CAD experience without compromise, but more on that in the coming weeks and months. So let's look at VR. We're really excited about this. Now, the industry's been talking about VR for forever. But what's changed over the last couple of years is how people are using VR to collaborate, and the quality experiences that are available with VR right now that allow you to seamlessly shift from virtual reality to mixed reality. And let's have a look at this demo here, developed in tandem with our partners Vario. This is a virtual collaboration session. Yes, the folks who are working remote are Darth Vaders. Don't ask me why, but you can see the fellow here on the right is actually present in this real space. What you see is a physical space, and he's collaborating with his partners who are dispersed around the globe. The quality here is that he can see the space that's around him, the physical space that's around him, but the car here, or the building, or the infrastructure is virtual. And this helps break down barriers between geographically dispersed teams who need to collaborate effectively, who need to solve the challenge of how the heck do I have a design review with my team who's dispersed across the country. And technology like this helps. It's new and emerging, particularly the portion that allows you to deal with virtual and mixed reality. It is very, very computationally intensive, graphics intensive, but I'll get to that later. Yes, here we go. So we've worked very, very closely with Varjo. You know, when people deal with VR, they want plug and play. They don't want to be dealing with drivers and installation issues. You know, we've worked with Varjo to create certified workstations that work on this technology and other VR technology as well. So it's more plug and play. Visualization. Visualization is real time. I've been in the industry for like 25 years, and we've been talking about rendering forever. You know, even when I started back at Alias, rendering was wildly important. But a lot of things have changed over the last couple of years with the acceleration in technology of NVIDIA RTX graphics built within our Lenovo workstations. Users are now able to get this kind of graphic detail in real time. This is not pre-rendered. This is real-time graphics. So you can see reflections, occlusion, all those wonderful things that you have with software rendering in the past can be calculated in real time with game engine technology. In this case, it's Epic Games, the Unreal Engine. And what this means for companies, in this case, Neoscape, who specializes in developing these types of experiences, is that they can go to their customers in the boardroom, they can show them visualizations and have the confidence that what they're seeing is physically accurate, make design decisions on the spot without having to round trip to the render farm and wait a week to get feedback. They can make real-time decisions. It collapses the pipeline. It's more effective. It saves user money, time, and effort. So we're very,
Chris,
very excited.
I don't want to, yeah, Chris, I don't want to interrupt you there. I just want to note for everyone who's watching, if you were like me, you might have seen those renderings kind of jumping and glitching a little bit. Just so you know, I saw the video prior to this and when we were kind of sharing over our airways here, and it was a smooth, seamless video. So just so you guys know, that's the experience that they're able to deliver.
Thanks for the reminder. You know what? We've got a slide that has links to some of these videos on YouTube that you can have a look at if you're interested after the event. So let's talk about reality capture, reality compute. It's called a variety of different things. This is the world where photogrammetry and LiDAR point scanning and processing is used by the industry for, you know, construction, renovation, retrofit, the, you know, ability to scan site conditions on a daily basis to monitor changes. You know, it's used in manufacturing for factory design, optimization. In building, it's extremely important for cases where there are no BIM plans for historical buildings or buildings that are adjacent to others where there are no BIM plans or infrastructure. It's extremely computationally intensive when we're dealing with point clouds that have billions and billions of points, requires very, very high-end CPUs, very high-end graphics to be able to process these point clouds and turn them into usable information for BIM data. We're talking up to 32 cores, depending on the solution, whether you're using Faro Scene or Recap or Bentley's, I think it's Context Capture, Leica, Cyclone. These are the popular solutions that I'm sure you're familiar with. Reality capture places tremendous demands on workstation performance. And we'll talk about some requirements in a few moments. One that I'm passionate about is the convergence of manufacturing and building. I'm going to show you a quick example of some forward-thinking workflows of a customer who's working in the Netherlands called Actual. They've built, 3D fabrication facilities that allow them to print building parts and have their customers choose these building components almost like from a catalog. Now, what we're seeing, I think the overall trend is that, buildings of the future will be in part manufactured. Digital fabrication is a way to help save money, optimize building performance and building construction. So this is emerging, but it's very, very interesting. It's something that we're following. It's also very computationally intensive to generate the G code that's required to tell these robots to print what you'll see here. Now, this video has sound. If it doesn't play, I'll voice it over. Let's see what happens.
In construction, we really work with a lot of standardized products, but this also leads to a lot of waste because products don't fit. So it seems that buildings are being designed to fit the materials that already exist. And we try to really flip this around and provide tools and materials to really create any kind of building product that allows you then to create any kind of architecture. My name is Zerto. I'm an architect. I actually think in the future the AEC industry will be much more about the scope design because of the 3D printing that we developed over the last 6 years. What's so great about 3D printing is that you can make things tailor-made, so everything really fits. We really need equipment that operates at the highest level so that we can focus on the most challenging problems. So Lenovo workstations are used during every step of the process, from initial design to final production. And I really can't wait to see what the future will bring us.
So great story that really touches on the future possibilities of digital fabrication. That's only one aspect of digital fabrication. This example is another favorite of ours. We worked very closely with MX3D as they developed the world's first stainless steel 3D printed bridge that will be installed over a canal in Amsterdam in the red light district very, very soon. It's an exciting project because it encompasses the converging worlds of building and manufacturing, touching on the world of IoT and smart building, the development of digital twins, and really gives us a glimpse of what's going to be possible in the future as owners and operators of building and infrastructure have to deal with big data and what that data can tell them about operating their buildings more effectively. So let's have a quick look here. And I'll just voice this over. So MX3D developed the technology to actually print stainless steel, which was new and unique at the time. They were originally going to try and build the the bridge on site. What you just saw is the sensor network that's being plugged into the system, to the bridge. It's almost like having a nervous system built into the bridge. So a series of sensors that test for temperature, displacement. So the bridge knows what's happening to it at all times in real time. And this data can be captured to help with, to ensure that the bridge is performing to its as-built designed spec. It will also help inform the building of future structures like these and connect to a smart city infrastructure in the future to help with a myriad of issues, safety, traffic, etc. Again, very forward-looking. But today we see many, many, many AEC firms and contractors dealing with how do I manage and integrate IoT infrastructure into my building. So as we transition in this presentation, we'll talk a little bit about, we came from these trends. Let's look at workstation recipes for success when we talk about the hardware, where the industry is going, evolving. Data isn't getting any smaller. Workloads aren't getting any smaller. Demands are increasing all the time. Now, Before I joined Lenovo 4 years ago, I had no idea what was under the hood of my workstation. It's just IT gave it to me and it just worked, which was great. But there are a lot of things that IT departments and end users really do need to consider as they optimize their IT spend for workstations, because it's horses for courses. You need to really optimize the four main components within a workstation: the processor, the graphics, the memory, and storage. You need to optimize that to your workflow and your workload. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with customers who say, I bought a P920 and it's not running Revit as fast as my older P330. And that's because you're using the wrong workstation for that particular job. And we'll dissect why in just a moment. And just a reminder about the Lenovo Advantage, our folks, at the booth, Able One, and Brad can walk you through some of these advantages. We're very, very proud of our engineering, the mil-spec testing, the engineering that goes into making a mobile workstation run cool and quiet. There's so much that goes into being able to pack, 5,000 level graphics from NVIDIA into a P1. Anyway, more on that later. Let's look at common solutions for Veeam. As a user, you're likely going to see many of these applications on your desktop, particularly Revit, AutoCAD, SketchUp, Rhino, pretty much mainstay for the design side. You really do need a high clock speed to run these CAD applications effectively. Higher clock speed, the better it's going to run. Same is true for a lot of infrastructure software. Bentley in particular, AutoCAD Civil 3D, which is a derivative of AutoCAD. Many of the other solutions are very, very clock speed sensitive. Some of these also require good graphics. And then we move into the world of visualization. Lumion is very, very popular. It's also extremely graphics intensive. So when you have this duality of a architect, designer, and engineer who needs to design in CAD but also visualize, you really need to think about what goes into your workstation to ensure that user has what they need under the hood to get their job done. And then last but not least, we talked about reality capture, which has a balance of some of these other formats to run them as effectively as you can. High clock speed, graphics, storage as well. And just a quick shout out that most of the applications that you see on the previous screen are ISV certified. So we test them in our lab to ensure that they run properly on our workstations, our graphics boards, our processors. So you can buy with confidence, knowing that a Lenovo solution from Able One is going to perform the way it should with your CAD app of choice. So let's look at these quickly individually. Workstation processors. Clock speed is king here. The higher clock speed, the faster your CAD app is going to run. These are solid modeling applications. They can only do one thing at once. So it's the clock speed that determines the processor, plain and simple. And we'll talk about which processors those are. The other thing to consider is cores, balancing your clock speed versus cores. Cores are generally used for rendering or multi-physics simulation. CAM is very sensitive to cores as well. Reality capture, generative design, AI as well will typically use cores. So if you've got users working hybrid, you have to balance those. GPU acceleration, a lot of the rendering applications now are GPU accelerated, including V-Ray. Unreal Engine requires very good graphics, etc. So here's a breakdown of some of the processors on the market. For us, for CAD, high clock speed is king. That's usually your Core i7 or i9 processors. The Xeon W processors add an additional layer of additional features that allow for ECC RAM, etc. They're also high clock speed, but they have, in some cases, greater cores, and it's subtle choice depending on the user need. The Threadripper Pro processor in the middle sits in our P620. This is new. We're the only one with a professional P6 Threadripper Pro processor on the market. They can go up to 64 cores, but they also have very, very high clock speed given the core count, which makes them a perfect solution for folks doing CAD, as well as rendering, simulation, visualization, analysis, etc. And last but not least, we have our Intel Scalables on the far right. These usually sit in our dual socket machines, like the P720 and the P920. And these are really your boxes for multi-physics simulation or AI. And that's, you know, a much, much smaller part of the market. Graphics, you know, lots of considerations for graphics, complexity of your models, how many screens you're running, et cetera, et cetera. And NVIDIA has so many products. RTX is the buzzword of the day, but I've tried to break it down to as simply as I could. 1 to 2000 level graphics are great for 2D and 3D general CAD, AutoCAD and Revit. As you move into the 4 and 5000 level graphics, these are generally used for GPU-based rendering, VR, reality capture, etc. And then when you get up to the really higher end, 6000 and 8000, these are for GPU accelerated rendering for that visualization specialist who sits and supports the team who does rendering all day long. These are going to make their lives so much easier. Oh yes, just a quick reminder here on VR, you're looking at 7 times, almost 8 times greater data that's being pushed through your workstation. So you really need a powerful graphics board, 4000 and up if you're doing Pro VR. RAM is the second biggest bottleneck behind your CPU when you're dealing with BIM models. These are the things that you need to remember. I'll point out to, it's important if you're working on a desktop workstation to balance the memory across all of the channels. This is going to give you the best performance. That means you've got the same size RAM stick in each of the DIMM slots. And for CAD, I can't in all good conscience recommend anything less than 32 gigabytes if you're working with mid to large size BIM data sets, and that goes even higher. We have some who are using 64 and even higher. 16 gigabytes will work for 2D CAD, depending on what you're doing, AutoCAD, Civil 3D, you know, Bentley, etc. The 32 is really the sweet spot now. Storage, this is fun. I'm sure everybody remembers the old HDD spinning hard drives that run at about 200 megabits a second. Then came along SATAs, SSDs that run at 500 megabits. Really exciting, super fast. And now every workstation we ship comes with M.2 PCIe drives. They're solid state. They run at around 300 megabits a second. That's 10 times faster than what we were experiencing 5 years ago. I would never recommend getting a workstation that doesn't have a boot drive with an M.2. This is where you want to be pulling your data in from. The others are great for archive and storage in workstations that can support them. And now, as we wind down here, let's talk about a recipe for success. So when you're building a workstation on the CPU side, if you're doing CAD, look for a clock speed of 4.5 to 5 gigahertz plus. That's going to give you the fastest speed. It varies between desktop and mobile. But higher core counts if you're doing things like rendering, simulation, analysis, etc. To check your software as well. Memory, 32 gigabytes, 64 plus if you're working with massive BIM data sets. And it all depends on your projects. We have SMBs who are working on some very, very large projects. Graphics, as I said, 1 to 2000 level graphics for 2D and 3D BIM, and you scale up depending on what you're doing, rendering, simulation, analysis, AI, etc. And storage, you know, 500 gigabytes is a good starting point depending on how you connect, where your data is stored, whether it's stored locally or on-prem or in a virtual cloud. So as we close, I just want to call out a couple of new products. You can go and see them virtually this afternoon with Able One and our experts from Lenovo. I think Brad will be there. P60 or the P1 is fantastic. New, completely new architecture. I'm using a P1 older generation. This has a new 16 by 10 screen, which is great aspect ratio for Revit. It has the low blue light display. It can store up to RTX A5000 graphics, which is fabulous because your users, you can configure this in a variety of ways for users who need just general 2D and 3D CAD up to visualization users who need high-end graphics and have a single image to install, deploy, and manage, your entire staff. The call out to the P620 as well. This is the world's only Threadripper Pro workstation that can take up to 64 cores. It's built around the new PCIe Gen 4 architecture, 8-channel memory, up to 1 terabyte. This is like having a supercomputer or a cloud on your desktop, which is very important for some workflows. And it's great for remote work as well, because you can connect to it back at the office to be able to do these types of workflows that may not make sense to bring a large workstation like this back home. And I think we're winding down. Just a quick reminder that there's a lot beyond hardware. As Mark said, we at Lenovo, we have ISV certification. We also have software solutions, diagnostics, security. All of this becomes part of a larger IT infrastructure spend considerations that help keep you productive, safe, and productive in this new work anywhere reality. And with that, I want to thank Melanie and Able One for having us. I love doing these presentations, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Chris. At this time, I am excited to welcome our next presenter up onto our virtual stage. To give a bit of an introduction here, as Mark mentioned earlier, with remote working, we all needed to adapt and adopt new tools very quickly to enable virtual collaboration as well as process digitalization. One of the most commonly adopted tool sets that's been powering businesses to meet these needs and to transform how they work is Microsoft 365. So here today to speak to us about building a modern workplace for your team, I'd like to welcome Jared Burnett from Microsoft. Jared is, yeah, and I was just going to mention, Jared is Customer Success Manager for Modern Workplace at Microsoft, and excited to have him here today. Jared, passing over to you.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much. Over the next 20 or so minutes, we're going to continue on some of the themes that we've heard from Chris and Mark and Melanie, but in the context of software and Microsoft Teams. And although a lot of these things that I'll share and show you may be industry agnostic, we can always think about how to apply these to specific architecture and engineering scenarios. So digital transformation is more urgent than ever. We know that 80% of business leaders across all industries intend to accelerate their digital transformation. So there's no waiting, there's no procrastinating. We need to ensure to remain competitive in the market versus our competition. That digital transformation is absolutely key. And we believe Microsoft is uniquely suited to partner with you on your journey. This will be the only sales slide, if you will. We have that integrated portfolio of solutions. Most of our solutions are familiar and easy to use. We've all used Excel and Word and PowerPoint on a day-to-day basis. Built-in security. Chris and Mark were talking about security. You're going to see that theme propagate through my presentation. It's so critically important. And the differentiated value that Microsoft offers across the entire ecosystem. So some context. This is my Jared slide. Okay, so this is specifically for this group. I wanted to make sure we're all grounded in the same concepts or ideas, if you will. So we saw 3 years of digital transformation accelerate to 3 months. This is a quote from our CEO, Satya Nadella. When the whole COVID-19 epidemic hit us, we actually saw what we consider 3 years of planning and digital transformation really take place in a span of only 3 months. A multi-generational workplace equals multiple approaches and technical acumen. Mark, you might have a few more years in the world than I do, and you may work differently than I do. But Melanie work differently than I do as well. We have everybody from Gen Xers to Gen Z, baby boomers. So we see about 5 generations now in the workforce, and we all work differently. So we need to make sure that we have the tools and resources to cross that divide, that generational divide, to make things happen. Different industries and players within those industries are at different levels in their digital transformation journey. We all know that. Some are further ahead than others. And I know that this industry specifically, there are some laggards, and we want to make sure that we catch you up. Substantial increase in cyber attacks. Need I say more? Digital collaboration. When I talk about collaboration and teamwork, it's not just a Zoom call. It's not just a Teams call. Digital collaboration and teamwork goes far beyond just the video conferencing call. We also need to consider the needs of all employees to provide accessible solutions to allow all to thrive and contribute to the organization's success. That can be a couple different shades, if you will. One is we have a number of great employees that may have hearing disabilities or visual impairments. We build our software from the ground up to consider all of these things to ensure that everybody on our team can contribute at 110%. In addition, with disparate workforces and remote work, we have folks that are distributed across all 160 Lenovo countries. I think I saw 160 countries there on Chris's presentation. Well, we have, inline translation. So if I'm sitting here and my colleague is sitting in Paris enjoying a cafe, while I speak, artificial intelligence is transcribing that and translating that in real time so we can have a fruitful meeting, although we have various languages. Apps like Jira and Workday, they play really nice within Teams, and I'll show you a little bit about what that may look like further on in the presentation. And at the end of the day, hybrid work is here to stay. Remote work is here to stay, and we need to work with our people as leaders to combat digital exhaustion. So here's the hybrid paradox. 73% want flexible remote options to stay. We heard a statistic very similar to that, I think, from Chris and Mark earlier. 67%, though, want more in-person work or collaboration post-pandemic. So we all want to work remote. We all want to work from different locations, but we also crave that physical interaction. So that's where the hybrid work model really comes to play. Now, we need to combat digital exhaustion. We're going to be on this Great Able One seminar this morning. It's going to be 3 hours. We may jump on to back Zoom and Cisco and Teams calls this afternoon. Without breaks, our brains look like the left, right? Remember those old public service announcements? This is your brain on drugs. Well, this is your brain on back-to-back digital meetings. It's exhausted. By putting small breaks, I've actually changed my Outlook calendar within Office 365 to set meetings at 25 and 50-minute intervals. That gives me 5 minutes or 10 minutes in between meetings to at least refresh and restart for the next meeting. Rather than going from 2:30 to 3 to 3:30 to 4, I go from 3 to 3:25, and I can assure you that a 25-minute meeting or a 50-minute meeting can be as productive as a 30 or 1 hour meeting. So little behavioral changes as we enter the second year of hybrid work will be really important for us to make our brain go from blood red on the left to more soothing blues and greens on the right. Now, Microsoft Teams is our platform of choice to unleash hybrid work. Microsoft Teams sits within Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and it's that one hub for teamwork where we can meet, chat, phone, our soft phone, our calls, where we can collaborate, and we can even automate certain tasks. I'm not going to go too deep on all of these pillars as I only have 20 minutes, but I will show you a few things in a moment on how I work day to day within Teams. I do want to touch, though, on one important element of Teams and hybrid work and teamwork. We all spend a lot of time in meetings, and meeting experiences, we want to make sure that we can connect those meeting experiences to those that are both remote and on-site. More online meetings than ever we're experiencing, but are they as productive as we want them to be, right? Not all attendees feel included. We have unprepared attendees. There's distractions. There's no context shared. We want to make the hybrid meeting experience better. We want to be able to deliver engaging and inclusive meetings from anywhere at any time. We want to be able to collaborate and stay focused during, before, and after the meeting. And we also want to bridge that gap across remote and on-site work with Teams devices, Lenovo devices, any type of hardware that we may have. So how do we bring this to life? And then I'm going to get into the demonstration soon, Melanie, but I wanted to show how do we bring this meeting idea to life, the pre, during, and post meeting experience, because meetings aren't moments in time anymore. When I have a Teams meeting, I'll of course prepare for the meeting, distribute an agenda, provide context, but then during the meeting, we're transcribing, we're taking notes, we're assigning actions, and then after the meeting, we're following up, we're reviewing, we're accessing transcripts and recordings, following up on to-dos. So the meeting is a life cycle. It's not a moment in time. And within the context of Microsoft Teams, you can set that context. And let me show you a few things. So I'm going to end the presentation right now, and we're going to go into my Teams. So what I'm showing you here is my real Teams. So I'd appreciate no screen captures or anything like that, because there's probably some stuff you shouldn't be seeing here. But in the effort or in the spirit of transparency, this is the way I work. I want to get out of email hell. I don't want 100 emails, things that can easily be addressed with a quick chat or ping. It doesn't need to be an email or a meeting. So when I come in to the office or my home office in the morning, I don't open up Outlook. I open up Microsoft Teams. And here you can see along the left nav bar, I have a number of different options. First thing is activity. This is where, and by the way, my Teams is probably busier than most because I work at Microsoft on the Teams business. So don't let my structure scare you. Think about how you may want to, construct your virtual teams as you go through the presentation, as you see what I'm doing here. So the first thing I do is activity. This is where people may have sent me a chat. I should be aware of certain things. So I can scan this and I can see, okay, look, there's a dark one here. This one I haven't read. What's this all about? Jeff liked what I had to say yesterday. He gave me a big thumbs up, right? There's that interaction. There's those opportunities to like and smile and emoji. It helps soften the day, if you will. Now, next thing I do is I go into my chat. This is where I spend actually quite a bit of time. Now, Jeff is a colleague of mine. I did a presentation yesterday for a big telco with a red logo that owns sports teams. And Jeff was saying, hey, I think I can support you. It's Rogers. But hey, now I can't make it. So we're going back and forth. Hey, I finished it. It went well. He gives me the thumbs up. We've closed that. Just a real informal chat. Now, the beauty is that chat is in real time on my iPhone as well. So what you're seeing on screen is real-time collaboration across all devices. I can pull up my Lenovo ThinkPad, I can pull up my Android device, my Windows 10 device, and everything is in real time. So these are the chats, whether it's a one-on-one chat or a group chat. This is all of my chat history here. And again, this transcends across all devices. So if I'm on site and I need something back at the office, a drawing, a rendering, rather than making phone calls or sending emails, I can easily ping the person I need and say, hey, I need this real quick. And it's sent through Teams. Bob's your uncle, and I have the information I need. Now, Teams, this is the teams that I'm part of, right? So we all have teams that we're part of, whether it's divisional, whether it's functional. These are my teams. Again, mine probably look a little bit more scary than maybe Melanie's because I work for Microsoft and I work on the Teams business. But the reality is this is where I communicate with folks on my team. So I work primarily for the CSM team, the customer success team. So we have a number of different channels within the team. We have a social channel. So Sinead yesterday reminded us it's strawberry season and posted some great, what is that? It looks like a strawberry donut and whipped cream. And Will, my buddy, is saying, hey, a healthy amount of whipped cream here. We're just having a little bit of fun, right? We're smiling, we're liking it. It provides that water cooler talk that you may not experience anymore because we're not in the office. Again, nothing complicated or sophisticated here, but it helps us connect with individuals, whether we're at the job site or we're in the office or Melanie's favorite Starbucks. It's that human component, that connection that we want in this digital first world. Now, I also manage my calendar through Teams. And wink, wink, nod, nod. This is my Outlook calendar. So what Teams does is it brings in all sorts of information from the other Microsoft apps and surfaces it in Microsoft Teams. That allows me to remain in Teams for most of my day. I'm not jumping from application to application. You can see I've got to take my son to the orthodontist soon after this, and then we're going to get our vaccines. But this is my calendar. This is where I send meeting invites. This is where I check my calendar and what's coming up. And again, this is just the Outlook calendar that surfaces within Microsoft Teams, that one-stop hub for teamwork, if you will. So now I'm not jumping back and forth from Outlook. I've got about 5 minutes, so I'll show you a couple more cool things, 5 to 10 minutes. Now, here are my files, all right? So now all of the files that I've recently surfaced show up in Microsoft Teams. I don't have to open up PowerPoint. I don't have to open up Excel. Everything gets surfaced within the Teams environment within one click. I can see what documents I've worked on, where they're stored, and when I looked at them last. So hybrid work. I took some slides from my hybrid work deck for this particular meeting. So I clicked on hybrid deck and boom, here it is. It shows up in real time. I didn't have to go out to PowerPoint and open it. I didn't have to go to File Explorer and open it. It surfaces all of my latest documents right here on the Files tab. So if I've got a customer meeting that I need a deck for that I've recently worked on, I go here, I open it up. Again, there's some changes in behavior that we need to make. We're all used to using File Explorer or opening up PowerPoint. And I know that, engineering and architecture, we have some old habits maybe we need to break and think about how we work in this new world. And this sort of helps us make things easier. And once we get over the learning curve, and it's not that difficult, we start to really benefit from things like this. And again, when I open up Teams on my iPhone, I have the exact same list with the exact same files that I can open up on my mobile device, on my ThinkPad, and it's there in real time. The next thing I want to show you is calls. My telephone is now within Teams. Here's my dial pad. Right? Here are the folks that I've talked to. Microsoft Teams through Able One has the ability to take your phone and put it into Teams. My voicemails are transcribed in Teams. I get emailed the transcriptions of my voicemail. I can go right from this meeting into a phone call within the Teams environment. And again, same thing on my phone. Teams becomes my soft phone. It becomes my soft phone on my hardware. So now I've got one place where I can communicate, chat, email, and now actually use the phone. We also have a suite of solutions that we're starting to launch now called Viva. And this is all about the customer experience, the user experience, if you will. We want to integrate natural things within the workflow during the day. And learning is something that we all do and strive for. I know in your industry, in architecture and engineering, there's always courses and things that we need to take to make sure that we're up to speed on the latest trends. Those things are surfaced now within Microsoft Teams, and that's called Microsoft Viva Learning. So you can see a whole ton of different training that's using my profile and surfacing relevant training that AI assumes that I would be interested in. And I can launch these courses throughout the day when I have time right within Teams, so I can continue learning and getting better and contributing to the organization and to society as a whole. So it's a beautiful thing when you can use Microsoft Teams right, look at this, right within this template, right within this user experience. I can go to LinkedIn and launch a course and take it, and my managers can see that I've taken it, and I get a check mark and a raise. So the whole idea here is to think about Microsoft Teams as a total platform, not just for chat, not just for video collaboration. Now, Melanie, I do want to show one last thing in my last 5 minutes, and that's tasks by planner. We all have heavy duty project management software, I assume. But there's probably a number of organizations that are smaller that may not require the heaviest weight project management solution. So you can actually use Teams as a lightweight project management solution. And that's called Tasks by Planner within Teams. Now, you can see that I have a follow-up from yesterday to send the first 5 slides to my group. When I open this particular item up, I can see that it links me to meeting notes. So this will take me to OneNote, and we'll look at the meeting notes that were taken during my Rogers meeting yesterday. This is a dummy meeting note, so you're not going to see a whole lot. So we can add the notes here during the meeting, and then we can add specific tasks. And those tasks then show up in Microsoft Teams as tasks for you to complete. So we can add a label if you have a certain label. This is part of building 1, 2, 3 on site XYZ. We can bucketize the task. We can customize this. Where are we? Are we started? Are we in progress? Are we completed? We can assign a priority to it, start and end date, and then we can assign it to a certain person, add specific child items under the parent to do item, and then we can add document attachments, images, drawings, renderings. So again, the beautiful thing about this is this then transcends across all devices. So if I'm at a work site, a job site, and I'm doing project management in real time, I can now accomplish it within the Teams environment. So now I've got my to-do list here. My projects are all laid out in terms of what I need to do. Now I need to make a phone call the office and say, hey, Mel, can you help me out here? I need this real quick. And I'm not leaving Teams to do it. I'm going right back to my calls, right back to my phone pad. I'm dialing Melanie. Melanie's thinking, oh God, what does Jared want? She's going to pick up the phone on Teams, and we're going to have that VoIP conversation. She can send me the document, and there I have it. One final thing is, and I want to talk about document in just a second, one final thing is collaborating within documents. As I was preparing my PowerPoint presentation, you know, I had the pleasure of showing Melanie a few of these slides, and Melanie had some comments on, hey, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about that? So rather than emailing versions of the PowerPoint back and forth, Melanie, here's version 1. Great, Jared, thanks, I'll review it. I get another email back. Melanie's got version 2. Jared, here's version 2. Okay, I see her changes. How about this? I'm emailing version 3 back to Melanie. It's like, okay, where are we? We're in version 15.5. Nobody knows where we are. With real-time collaboration in Teams, I can open up my PowerPoint. I can send the link to Melanie and say, Mel, open this up. She opens it up and I open it up, and we're looking at the same document, but because it's hosted in the cloud, it's one single source of the truth. It's one single document. And as I'm making changes, right? I don't know. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add my middle name. Jared, you should add your middle name because it provides more authority. And I would add my real name, and Melanie would see that pop up in real time on her screen. And then Melanie said, hey, I want credit on here, and she's going to type her name. And I can see Melanie typing in real time Melanie's name on here. There's a little bubble that says Melanie, and in real time, I can see a ghost spelling out her name. It's automatically saving to the cloud. We're not going back and forth on versioning. And this is just PowerPoint. That philosophy transcends across Excel, across Word, across PowerPoint. So I can be on a spreadsheet, and quite often I know this group may use Excel as their project management tool. So we can be in Excel at the same time. And again, rather than sending documents back and forth with versioning, we can use that one single source of the truth. This is how our kids are working in school, frankly, through Google Docs and through Microsoft. They're used to using the one single source of the truth cloud document. So we need to make sure that we can help also adopt that philosophy. Enable One can help you do that. Again, it's a paradigm shift in how we work together. But at the end of the day, once we think about and implement some of these things, it can make your jobs a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot more productive as we move towards the permanency of this hybrid workforce. Melanie, I'll wrap it up there to get us 2 minutes back on time. But if there's any questions or comments, send them to Melanie and the team, and we're happy to follow up with you after. And again, Melanie and Mark and Chris, thanks for the opportunity. And most importantly, thank you to those that attended. I know there's a ton on your plate, and there's no shortage of things to do. So thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you so much, Chris, and for showing us the power of that platform. I think the idea of working from a single place to pare down kind of all the different places where we're all working these days is especially important. and loved seeing the power of, you know, putting together a team and being able to include everything you may want to have information on within that team. Not to steal Jared's thunder here, but I think something that we've seen popular in the architecture and engineering industry is to actually create your teams based on projects. So you can imagine taking all of your information related to a project, putting it in a single place, and, you know, a couple, you know, you finish out the project. Throughout the project, you're obviously managing it. The guys on site are putting all their information and their pictures from site into that project. Your team's storing their files in there and their notes from, you know, what the client's asking for. And then, you know, the project goes out and you're done, and it's a couple more years before it's constructed, and you can come back to that project and see all of the wonderful notes and everything, again, collapsed in a single place there. Definitely a very powerful tool. And thank you so much, Jared, for showing that to us today. Our next session is called Getting the Most Out of the Cloud. So I think we all know that, or at least we've all been hearing for years now, that cloud is everywhere. And we certainly heard that from a couple of our presenters earlier today. Interesting, we're actually starting to hear of some cases of people leaving the cloud. So here to give us a 101 on the cloud and to share some information on what you should be considering when you're making those types of decisions, we have Able1's own Chief Technology Officer, Jacques Swanepoel. Jacques, welcome, and I'm passing the presenter over to you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Yeah, let's just talk to everybody today. I can kind of look at how to get the most out of your cloud in this session. So quickly, 101 on the cloud. Which cloud you want to go to? What is cloud? We'll go through some of those information. What some of the misconceptions that you have that happens when you do go to the cloud. Picking the destination obviously is very important during this process. And through my career, what lessons have I learned that you can benefit from, so you don't kind of make the same mistakes or learning experiences. Certainly a lot that's been learned and improved over the years that we can share with the group. So, my career, I started in the backup world, backup as a service, backup as a DR, and through that, provide a lot of DR testing for customers, also help customers recover in real disasters, typically to a remote data center. And that was kind of like, the precursor to going to the cloud, because now your systems are running in a remote environment, and latency and all other things become a factor in that experience working out of a remote center. And now if you are going to migrate your workloads to the cloud or a hybrid cloud, all those factors become into play as well. So really going to kind of share some key points around from, over the last 20 years, the experiences I've built up in that. And, do appreciate that going to the cloud is a journey. It's not, kind of take everything and move tomorrow. It's you kind of do have to plan things, look at different applications, maybe move one workload, you move a second workload, do some testing and adjustment, and then move another workload. It does take some time and some really thorough planning to go through that process. And there's many stops on the way in going to the cloud. Email is certainly probably the easiest thing to move to the cloud today. And I think a lot of us on the call may have already moved to the cloud. If not, that is certainly highly recommended, the first thing to move. And it also kind of by nature becomes a kind of placeholder for which application or cloud you do end up going with, because if you are in one platform, then the login credentials and everything else just naturally becomes your credentials for the rest of the platform as well. So picking the right cloud provider is like really the important part of starting that journey, because that will probably set the direction for the rest of your workload that you do go to the cloud. And there's certainly a lot of providers out there. Microsoft Office 365, Google, AWS, they all have their different flavors of solutions that you can run. And again, through our experience, what we found, for traditional businesses, because again, they have to have, Word documents that they share around and Excel spreadsheets with numbers and stuff on it. And Office 365 does, and after using Outlook to access their emails, Office 365 with all those suite products around it does seem to be kind of the standard that everybody is still using in the kind of traditional business. And so therefore, Office 365 Azure email does become like an obvious choice to do go to the cloud. So that's probably highly recommended as an option to choose. Now, just because in the cloud doesn't mean they're going to take care of all the security for you. Security is still your responsibility. This is probably especially when you are going to the cloud. They provide a platform, they provide utility, but you're still responsible for securing your environment. Azure does have advanced threat protection options as well, level 1 and level 2, that you can add on to the Office 365 email solution, or of course, there's a variety of third-party providers that do email, because they've said it's well known that up to 90% of all phishing attacks is actually coming in through email. So if you do go to Office 365, do make sure that you do have like a really good security option implemented on top of the solution. And my last point that I kind of point out, and our previous speaker kind of talked on it a little bit, embrace the web. A lot of these technologies are moving away from thick clients. A lot of the capabilities are being built into a web platform. And also the benefit, if you are on the web, like for example, accessing email, if you go to like outlook.office.com, you can access that from any browser on any system securely. It runs over HTTPS to secure the information. And it just makes you more portable, more dynamic to be able to do your work faster and access your information. And a lot of the newer functionality things will happen in the future within the web platform. So, if you're today using the kind of heavy Outlook client to access your emails and, painfully organizing all your emails in different little folders and things, again, search in the new emails are much more powerful. And if you do use the web interface, it's using all the power of the cloud infrastructure to do your searches and find those emails. And so I highly encourage everybody, get off Outlook, the client, start using the web interface. So for the rest of your workloads, your virtual machines and your business applications, where do you actually move those to? Of course, AWS very famously started cloud. Actually, interesting story behind that is how that ended up in it is, they were running cloud to sell their book services, and they had all this additional compute infrastructure. And what if it wasn't Christmas season when they were busy, the rest of the year they were sitting around like, hey, what do we do with all this compute? And they said, well, let's try to rent it out and see if people actually rent it. And honestly, that's by accident why AWS kind of took the lead above, IBM or Microsoft or everybody else getting into the environment. But of course, since then, everybody else is now jumping on the cloud. Google is in there as well. And Azure has really taken off over the last few years and kind of bring their whole breadth and capabilities of the Microsoft ecosystem to the cloud, and with Teams and Office 365, OneNote, all those applications really tightly integrating. Azure today, probably in my opinion, is the leading infrastructure as far as bringing a traditional business to the cloud. If you're Netflix, yeah, sure, you use AWS because you need a lot of compute, you need it to be cost effective, and you really care about all those integration points. You just want to be able to distribute a lot of video media cost effectively. But yeah, for a traditional business, from all the reviews and analysis I've done, Azure is kind of a good choice for businesses. So what's some of the kind of misconceptions or gotchas that you go through? Well, cost is a big one. And there are some additional fees that are not obvious, especially when you go through the calculators that a lot of the vendors do. They normally mention the CPU and memory and disk space that you need. But there's also disk I/O. So when the system's actually reading and writing information to the system, there's some cloud providers have a minimum bundled in. Some of them have an excess number. But you certainly need to consider it when you plan out your costs going to the cloud. And again, this is what Able One is going to offer as part of the journey going to the cloud. We have all the experience, all the expertise to kind of run some analysis on your existing workloads, so that we can help you assess for what those numbers could look like. There's also potentially network egress charges. Egress, for those that don't know, means when you send data from the cloud outbound. The cloud providers want to grow their environments, and they make the ingress charges, which when data goes in for free, egress charges when data goes out, they do charge for it. But a lot of applications need to transmit data to vendors. If you're doing backup or DR solutions to other locations, then that becomes egress charges. And you do need to plan and pay attention to that as well. A lot of people miss that one. And then less is more. So what I mean by that, you're kind of traditionally in your main environment, if your systems are on site today, you've probably acquired some number of hardware and hosts where all your systems are running. And that's kind of seen as like a sunk cost. Like, hey, I bought all these machines, I might as well, quote, use it. So you can create virtual machines, you may overcommit some memory and CPU and other allocations on the machine. But when you go to the cloud, it's very detailed, as you pay for exact the CPU and the memory and the disk that you allocate. So part of the journey and planning of going to the cloud is to take a close look at your environment before you move and actually look at system by system, like how much resources does the system really need? And we've seen it like more often than not that the systems are typically over provisioned before they move to the cloud. And that's actually bad for performance as well. People would think like, hey, I want my machine to run faster, give it more CPU, give it more memory. But what they don't realize is at the lower hardware level, where the hypervisors manage these virtual machines, if you've allocated more CPU than what the system actually needs, the hypervisor has to do more work to find those resources for the virtual machine to actually run. So it actually slows down the process. If you have CPUs that's going to be allocated, but they're just going to be idling when the system actually runs. So less is more. You do want to make sure that you right-size your environment for both cost and performance. So latency, this is definitely, and with COVID, some people probably got some hint of it. People working from home, VPN into the office, and now things are just working horribly slow. So certainly people are more aware of it today, but certainly that's the number one thing that gets overlooked when workloads are moved to the cloud. Because even now, people working from home, they might just do a VPN and connect to their old workstation in the office and do their work from there, which is kind of like a type of virtual desktop infrastructure. But they're not truly in the cloud, where the software is running, the client is actually separate from the server, which could now be in the cloud. So latency between client-server applications is a really important consideration. Especially coming through the 1980s, 90s, where that was the thing that we went through, right? Everybody kind of developed client-server applications, and how systems were designed back then, and a lot of applications are still functioning that way. And so, what I mean by latency, right? Let's kind of define it. It's if you have a client, think of maybe like an accounting package or other software solution that has to access a database on the back end. And to be able to render the information on the screen, maybe it has to get the client's name and address, and then it maybe gets its transaction balance and maybe some transaction detail for the past to kind of build all the information you're looking at on the screen. And as it's doing that, it could be like maybe 10, 20, maybe even up to 100 different queries that it has to do to the backend server to find all the information. Now, sure, it's only a few milliseconds between yourself and the endpoint, which is not a lot. But now if you suddenly have to do the round trip 100 times, now it could add up to like 10 seconds before you actually get a response on the screen for the application to react. And that's a really poor user experience. And that kind of really points out like why latency is so important as part of the planning process to go to the cloud. So how do we actually address the latency issues if we have an applications that needs to go to the cloud? So there's a couple of ways you can deal with it. The kind of future and first way that you need to look at is, what cloud native capabilities do the vendor have? Maybe your existing vendor does have a Web 2.0 version. Think of Web 2 would be like, when you log into your online bank and you do it, get your transaction details, do transfers between your accounts. You're now interacting with a Web 2 application. So it's basically where you have like a dynamic web interface doing changes to the actual backend system. So that's considered the Web 2 technology. Web 3.0 is going to take Web 2 and like take it to the next level, where it's going to be even more distributed, more redundant. It's still going to be a web interface. And it's still very early days for Web 3.0, but you can certainly ask your vendors, if they do have a strategy around implementing Web 3.0, so you can kind of plan your migration strategy to the cloud. Another option, if you do have some applications where they don't have a web interface, but you do want to move your systems to the cloud, and then how do you deal with that? So VDI, remote desktop apps, are kind of the primary way how you do that. So VDI, it's virtual desktop infrastructure. Whether it's a Verizon view, or Azure now has Windows 10 that you can do as a VDI session. A couple of ways that you can do that, but essentially you get your desktop that's now executing and running in the cloud, and you access it remotely through some kind of thin client, which gives you a much better experience because now the client is running in the cloud desktop, and it can do all those back and forth between the server and the client can happen in the cloud, and it's only the rendering that gets displayed to the end user, and that technology has been highly optimized to give the user millisecond experience on the interface. Maybe it's only a few applications that has a challenge with dealing with the data. So another option you can use is a remote application where it's only that one or two specific applications, and they actually get published and executed as a window on your system. The user really can't tell the difference, but just from an architectural perspective, part of the workload would be in the cloud, and the rest of the applications would be running on the client, on the user's remote system. And of course, there's other solutions like Citrix, and Lenovo mentioned the GTX capabilities. So yeah, it's kind of part of the remote application and virtual desktop infrastructure. There's certainly a lot of choices out there. And again, AbleOne can kind of help and guide and work with you to pick and choose which one is right for your environment. I do want to mention RDP. Not that you should use it. I want to mention because you should not use it. RDP was really designed for a kind of system administration within an internal private network to be able to log into servers and manage it. It was not designed and intended to be used over the internet as a kind of remote way of accessing your systems. So my message there is, do not use RDP. There are security concerns, there are performance concerns, and the other applications that I've mentioned before is a much better way of accessing the cloud. So, and another big thing that people overlook going to the cloud is support. Azure now, if that's the platform that you go to, they do have optional add-on Azure programs that you can subscribe to for support. But in general, it's going to be highly recommended to rather work with a kind of local third-party provider that's more familiar with your applications and how it needs to interact with the cloud. Most likely the company that's going to help you move to the cloud will have more insights and knowledge for exactly how that application works. So again, but it is something you need to plan for and factor in. The cloud providers, typically the standard base package, they will make sure the environment, like the compute and memory and networking, is functioning. But beyond that, you're responsible for figuring out, like, hey, resetting user passwords and creating new accounts and doing your security and all of that stuff. You as the end user are responsible for it. And if you don't have the skill set, you certainly need to work with a IT company that can help you with that process. Somebody like AbleOne. And my background is in backups, so this is the thing that I need to highlight to everybody. And in my opinion, backup is not a backup until it's offsite. Now I say that in quotations because when you're in the cloud, well, what does offsite mean? It means you literally have to go to a different vendor, different cloud provider, and AbleOne does provide backup solutions as well that goes to a different location, different provider. And the misconception around backups is when people go to the cloud, they assume, well, it's their responsibility. Aren't they keeping, if something happens to their infrastructure, don't they recover? Well, and they do, but the nuance is in the difference. So what the cloud providers do is they provide like low-level storage redundancies and other redundancies, but they don't do backups. So a good example would be is, if a user that's planning to leave the company maliciously deletes some data of a system, well, the underlying storage and things are still working. If you're going to call your cloud providers like, hey, I want to recover the system, they're going to say, well, there's nothing to recover. It's up and running. Say, yeah, but I lost some data was deleted. You say, well, you need a backup solution for that. So that is probably one of the big misconceptions in the cloud is that, because they're providing the service as for the infrastructure, they provide infrastructure redundancy, which is a massive difference from actually providing backups that have retentions and that you can go back to. So key point there is make sure you have backups, make sure you have backups that goes to a different location. And disaster coverage. I mean, that's a big thing. The picture on the right-hand side, I don't know if people here in North America are too familiar with it. That's actually an OVH data center that burned to the ground a couple of months ago and took 3 million websites offline. So these things do happen. So you do need to plan for disaster recovery. and some of the things you need to consider for that process. And again, that's why, related to my previous slide, backup's not a backup unless it's offsite. So if you're depending on your cloud providers, you kind of quote snapshots and other technologies that they have, you can certainly use snapshots. It's a quick way to recover systems, but it's not your final solution. You need to have something that's offsite and remote. So whether it's a geo redundancy or some other replication technologies that you can use to get the data to a different location, it's really important to have a disaster recovery plan in place. And some of the things you need to consider around that is RPO and RTO. And what does that mean? So RPO is recovery point objective. So that means, do I need to recover back to the last few minutes? Is it okay if I recover from last night's backups? And that's important because it's going to determine if you can leverage your backup technology as part of your DR plan, or do you need some kind of replication technology that's more recent for getting your data offsite? That's why it's important to consider what RPO requirements you have. RTO stands for recovery time objective, and that really means like how fast you need to recover your systems. So just because you're using last night's backups as a key point, it's still going to take a lot of time to actually restore that data in your environment. So is that restore time acceptable for your business? If it's not, then again, you need to look at some kind of replication technology where you can fail over much faster. And basically, that's a quick summary of everything I've learned over the years, going to the cloud and things you should be aware of. And AbleOne well experienced in that field. Any way, shape, or form we can help you in that journey, kind of planning, suggestions, ideas, all those things we can help you with. Thank you.
I am delighted to introduce our keynote speaker today. Today we have Mr. Ken Muir here. Ken is a globally recognized leader in IT and cybersecurity. He's Chief Information Security Officer to a multitude of companies. He's author, a speaker, a research contributor, think tank member, and he's even worked on national security projects for Canada and the United States. Ken has been recognized as one of the top 100 cybersecurity thought leaders in 2020. Ken, a warm welcome, and over to you to speak to us about security.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for being here today. It's definitely a hot topic in today's world, but as I've been in this business since around 1993, you tend to have seen a lot of things over that time. So not a lot of really what's happening in today's world is really a big surprise for people like us that have been in this industry for a long time. So today's topics is really going to cover sort of three major areas. Actually, one is the challenges around cybersecurity. Some things that have been in the news lately from a world events perspective. And then, really, what do you do about all these things? One of the things I wanted to make sure about this particular presentation was not just explaining what the monster in the cupboard and trying to scare people and all that kind of stuff. It's really what you can actually do about it, because the solutions around how you deal with cybersecurity have been in existence for a long time. What really is not happening is companies not engaging the use of these tools and capabilities in order to help them to build proper security plans to address this situation. And as I go through the presentation, you'll kind of understand a little bit more about where I'm going with this. Just to call out some references, Verizon, they produce a report they have done for the last 16 years. It's a massive compendium of a lot of very detailed explanations about what's been going on from the previous 12 months. They've been doing this for 15 years. It's one of the many pieces of material that I read on a regular basis to make sure that I stay up to date on what's going on in the world. The Parliament Institute also is features in this as well. Again, these are highly summarized from the reports on there. And there was also a book in particular from a gentleman called Mark Goodman, who I had the opportunity to meet when my travels in the US. He was ex-beat cop in New York. He also worked with the Secret Service as well as the FBI. And I got an opportunity to speak with him about the book that he wrote. A lot of really interesting things in there. And some of the material, some of what I learned from that is features in this particular presentation as well. And then there's my own personal experiences of things that I've been working on, the people I've met, projects that I've been associated with over that time. So I started out in this business at about 1993. One of my friends at the time said to me, you know, Ken, you really need to look at cybersecurity. It's been the next big thing. And I was like, cybersecurity, I said, people don't even know what the internet is, and you're already telling me there's a problem with it. And so I started working and try to understand this business, and I never really looked back after that. It was a very interesting topic even back then, as minimal as it was. You know, the types of things that we were looking at really in the early days was, you know, did you have antivirus and did you have a firewall? And if you had those two things, if you were 100% compliant back then, is how we used to gauge your level of security with organizations. But as you know today, that's just not enough, and the complexities around it is really it's really mind-boggling the way these criminal organizations and nation states have actually adopted the use of these things in order to perpetrate, you know, theft of all kinds of assets from different companies. I've built and rebuilt security operations centers. I've worked with the top a couple of dozen companies in the Forbes 2000 list of global companies. I've been involved in lots of different things. And so it really gives you a great perspective on the way, you know, you view this industry. I always like to talk about my influences in this business because, especially in the time when I got into this, there wasn't really a lot written around cybersecurity unless you wanted to study how to secure a mainframe. Not a lot of use in the distributed world of, you know, Windows and Windows networking. So I read the Sun Tzu's The Art of War back in the mid-90s. I read this book about a dozen times, and I've met other people in this industry that have you know, very serious responsibilities in this business. And this book has also been a reference material for them as well. It's actually used in business. It's used across the globe for lots and lots of different reasons. The philosophies around, it's not just about military tactics. It's really just about tactics. You know, if you're looking to win against someone else, whether it's in business or whatever, yeah, this book is entirely applicable. One of the things that I discovered in my research for it was, if you're not familiar with him, is a gentleman by the name of Philippe Scolari. He won the World Cup for both Portugal and Brazil, and he actually credits the wins that he had based on this book, which kind of blew me away. But it's a very adaptable book, but it informed the way I approached cybersecurity. I work really at a philosophical level and a business level. I'm not, even though I'm highly technical, it's really around what those solutions are able to do to solve business problems has always been the way I've looked at this. One of the other influences I had was from a gentleman by the name of Kevin Mitnick. He's known as the most famous hacker in the world. He was one of the first people that was a high-profile catch for the FBI, but when you read about how he managed to evade them and for the years and the things that he did, it's really eye-opening, because one of the things that I learned is up until that point, everything that I had been studying, like network designs and how to hack systems and the use of all different kinds of security technologies, none of that really made any difference in his world, because he would just basically call somebody up and say, hey, I need something, pretending to be somebody else, without policies and procedures in place to, you know, for an individual to understand what was appropriate to allow out of the company. He used to take advantage of that. He stole lots and lots and lots of intellectual property, broke into places, just walked in buildings and just helped himself to things, because there wasn't really a procedure in place for these organizations. And so he would scale down the amount of time it would take for him to break into a place, you know, from weeks to days, just by doing some research. And in the early days after I read this, I actually started incorporating that as part of the services that we did for pen testing. So not only were we looking to hack into systems, but, you know, could we infiltrate an organization with their permission, of course. And it was literally, I wouldn't say it was really easy, but with the right study, it was possible. What I learned from that was you needed to walk softly and carry a big briefcase. With those two things, you pretty much could get into anywhere. You know, some charm and stuff also helped as well. The two things that I want you to walk away from in terms of this presentation are these things right here. The business that I'm in is a very complex business. It's grown from, you know, very minimal aspects to things that are very, very complicated today. And that's what the role of, you know, people in my position is, to be able to take that complexity and distill it down into things that are really understandable for business across the board. There's two things I would say is you really need to become experts at what what you do in terms of cybersecurity. The reason why I say this is because you will never, a typical organization will never learn to understand the capabilities of nation states and cyber criminal organizations, the motivations that they have and the skills and capabilities that they have are just, they're truly unbelievable actually. But if you learn to develop good strategy and good practice in your own business, those are the things that will actually defend you against what these guys are capable of doing. Because at the end of the day, they're looking for risks in your environment. They're looking for vulnerabilities. They're looking for ways to break in. If you close off all those areas from them, what ends up happening is they're really looking for like the path of least resistance. And so if you're putting up a lot of resistance in terms of being able to get access to your environment, it does actually help a lot in terms of reducing that risk that you could be compromised. And the way you do that is you have to build a proper strategic plan around cybersecurity. All of the things that some people in my position and experience are well adept at. Hence the reason why I work with lots of different organizations. I choose not to work with one organization just to apply these experiences because there just isn't enough people in the marketplace that have this level of experience and then really understands both the cybersecurity and the business aspect of how it's implemented. There isn't really a lot spoken about the Canadian experience in terms of cybersecurity, but one organization, CDW, actually did a research a couple of years ago. Some of it's based on the Statistics Canada's research as well, but they actually took it one step further to kind of understand really what was going on. And what they learned from this experience, and you can check this on Statistics Canada's website, is around about 20% of businesses in Canada have been hit by ransomware. That equates to about 260,000 businesses. So we're in the hundreds of thousands now, but these are 2019 numbers that started probably at the end of 2018. And so really, like, we're probably in and around 500,000 companies that have been hit by this because we're hearing about this, on a daily basis. And so it's really concerning because we only have a population of about 1.3 million businesses in the country. So when you're talking about 500,000 companies that have been hit by ransomware, this is really of a major concern to us. One of the other things that came about from the research that they did was not only, and we've seen this actually, this is not, some research that was done in the ether and, it didn't affect us, but we've actually worked with customers where they were brought down by ransomware. And then soon after the cleanup was done, they were infected again. And the reason why this happens is because these criminal organizations, like, they're very smart. They know that people run backups. They know that backups may be run once a day, once a week, once a month, whatever that number is. And it's not a case that you click on a link and it downloads the malware and boom, the ransomware kicks off. It just doesn't work like that. They'll actually allow the ransomware to sit in your organization for weeks if necessary to make sure it's infecting also your backups as well. So Jacques was talking about making sure you had backups, but we also need to make sure that those backups are clean going into there. So this is a real thing. This really does happen. And so paying attention to this and having the right solutions in place to make sure this doesn't happen to you is really, really important as business owners. One of the other problems that we have in this industry is the cybersecurity talent crunch. There just aren't enough cybersecurity professionals to go around for all of the businesses globally that actually need this type of service, need this type of skills and capabilities. And even the people that are in this business, the irony is that, yes, we have X number of cybersecurity professionals in this business, but in today's world, what I've noticed is that a majority of these people pretty much pick a lane in cybersecurity. Before it used to be antivirus and firewalls. Now it's, there's 1,000 different things or different areas that you can be in this business. And as a result of that, somebody might want to be a pen tester, another one wants to do compliance work. But there's not a lot of movement between these different areas within cybersecurity to get that kind of holistic understanding of really what's going on. Hence the reason why the idea of using managed security services is really growing in popularity the last few years, because for the cost of a single security employee, you can literally outsource a lot of your IT or security to an organization for almost the same price. But now you've got a team of people working for you as opposed to just an individual that doesn't have all of the required skills to really effectively secure your organization. Next couple of slides, a little bit tongue in cheek, but just to really set the tone. This is how it used to be when I first started out. It was a really simple understanding around cybersecurity. It was a very symmetrical approach. You had the bad guys on the outside, the good guys on the inside, and a firewall in between. You were good, along with a sprinkling of antivirus, and you were pretty much good. But in today's world, this is really what the picture looks like. You know, we really are in a what they're calling a cyber war at the moment, because it's really like the countries that are going up against these cyber criminals that exist in certain countries around the world, and in the cybersecurity community, we know who those are. But this is what the problem is that your traditional sort of way of doing things from a cybersecurity perspective, it's just not working. The problem is asymmetrical, and it requires an asymmetrical response. And it's the reason why so many organizations in this country alone actually have been taken down by these things. Because the question you have to ask yourself is this: if you're spending money on security solutions and you're still getting breached, there's obviously a disconnect between what you're buying, the way you're implementing it and managing it, and the reality of really what's going on out there. And so really I'm setting the tone for explaining how you actually get around and fixing your environment to avoid these particular situations. One of the things that, one of the pictures that's in here is about a drone, which I'll talk about another as part of this presentation. Now, every presentation that's done on cybersecurity wouldn't be complete without the discussion around ransomware. And I've been talking about these things for years, actually, long before it really has become the highlight of the cyber criminal world, actually. The reason why ransomware has become so popular is it's literally very debilitating for companies. It's absolutely debilitating. When you've been suffered with ransomware, it takes down your entire operation and you're unable to function. And so the issues around it are pretty significant. I talked about this a few years ago, the development of the way ransomware was going, and this has relevance to some things I will talk about later on in this presentation. So when we talk about the triple threat, there's actually 3 packages of malware that actually gets delivered into a system before the ransomware actually kicks off. The elevation of privileges is basically, you know, if I can get access to the janitor's laptop, somewhere in there, I'm going to be able to figure out how to elevate my security level to get me up to the root admin, you know, the top dog in the admin world for a network. Whoever has power over that network, that's what that's the goal of this, is to be able to do that. And unfortunately, this happens more often than it should, but it does. But they need to be able to get to that level to do the next step, which is to then encrypt the files. But what they've started doing is basically stealing your data before they encrypt the files. This way, it guarantees them some kind of a payout, whether it's you paying them the ransomware amount that they're looking for so you can get the keys, or you're paying the ransomware because you know that they have your stolen IP, customer data, everything that could really be, you know, affect your business in some way, either financially or through reputation or some combination of all those things. And if you don't pay for any of those things, they just put this stuff on the dark web, and that's how another way that they make money. So really, it's a win-win-win for those guys, and it's unfortunately very, very embarrassing for a lot of organizations. And one of the things I noticed too over time is that if you end up in the media, it actually never goes away. There is no such thing as a 15 minutes of fame anymore. There are thousands of news outlets in the world that are dedicated to cybersecurity, and it just makes the rounds, and it can go on for years and years and years, and in perpetuity. One of the things I always, when I do a lot of speaking engagements, I always mention to people, you know, you can spend millions on technologies, but you'll always be defeated by the end user with one click. And it's really relevant in today's world, because when I talk to cybersecurity people specifically, I said, you know, you guys are like a secret society. You know, you come up with all these grandiose plans about what you're going to do for cybersecurity, but then you don't tell anybody. Like the users themselves, the end users have no idea what you're doing. They don't know what or understand their place in the whole cybersecurity architecture that you're trying to put together. And yet they're the people that are at the most risk, especially in this last year with COVID, people going home and having, you know, IT groups trying to make them, you know, get them back and operational. A lot of people are using their own machines at home that don't have the same level of security as what you would expect in your organization. So the risks around those things were really bad. And one of the things that Jack had mentioned earlier in his presentation was the use of remote desktop. You know, I'm not going to go through the explanation of it, but because Jack had already done that. But unfortunately, the 50% of ransomware that takes place was not because of people clicking on links on emails. It was actually because IT people were opening up firewalls to allow their end users to be able to connect directly to systems. And you know, honestly, that was a gold mine. It was a bounty for these cyber criminals, because all of a sudden they have direct access to your internal network. Not a lot of effort required to break in from that point. And I have examples of how that's done in the later part of the presentation. And so making sure that you cover all these different bases, it's almost self-inflicted in a lot of ways, because we're just handing over the ability for cyber criminals to infiltrate your network so easily, using techniques that have been around for decades. I found this was really interesting. The World Economic Forum does research every year, specifically around what they call the top 10 clear and present dangers. So cybersecurity actually made it into this top 10 list for the first time ever in 16 years of them actually doing this research. And so, we made it onto the list along with infectious diseases, livelihood crisis, extreme weather events, terrorist attacks, all these sorts of things. And not only is it going to survive the next 2 years in terms of clear and present danger, it's actually, they feel that it's going to extend out for the next 0 to 5 years as a clear and present danger. And when you think about why it would make this into that list, we're on target for losses around $6 trillion this year in cybersecurity related criminal activity. $6 trillion. It was hundreds of millions in the 90s when I first started doing research. Now it's into the trillions. And so really what it's doing is really affecting whole economies around this. And it's not, the losses are just based on, recovery costs, litigation, all these things that happen as a result of on there, but it's actually affecting the actual credibility of countries that are being affected by these things as well. Another thing I'll cover as part of this presentation. The Parliament Institute, actually, what they typically do on a yearly basis is they are able to quantify what it costs in terms of the breaches that happen on a yearly basis. They do a lot of research to figure out how this works. The interesting thing about this is that years and years ago, it was really difficult for us to be able to quantify, if you spent $1, how much would you save? It was really, really difficult to figure that out. In today's world, it's a no-brainer. Like, we have so much precedent in terms of companies being breached and how much their losses amount to. And like I said, this year we're on task for losing around $6 trillion based on, previous data from years ago. That's the trend that seems to be taking place most of the time. One of the things that you'll learn to understand over the, in working in this business is there is this concept of how long it takes for somebody to actually identify a breach within their organization. So bear in mind how long I've been in this business. I've heard this over and over where people say, well, we've never been breached, so we must be good. I need to really, really stress the fact that the whole idea of the cyber criminals activities is so they're not detected at all. It's kind of pointless breaking into a place and then getting picked up straight away, because then it wouldn't be an industry. The reason why it's an industry is because they are able to break into your networks and maneuver around, and what we do, they call lateral movement across systems. And on average, it takes about 280 days to not only identify this, but actually to remediate the damage. 280 days. Our pen testers have shown, customers that we've done pen tests for internally, they literally can own a network in a day. So if that's the case for majority of networks, that means that on average, there's 280 days to actually learn about a company's systems, the processes that they use, and things like that, which help them to, perpetrate their criminal activities. Just to give you an example of how this works is City of Burlington, a couple of years ago, they lost $500,000 through and through a payment that was made that wasn't supposed to be made, because the cyber criminals, once they live in your network, they learn about the process of how you make payments. They learn to understand who authorizes those, what is the process for that, and then eventually they start injecting themselves into that process. And that's how they lost $500,000. The irony is that it wasn't picked up for 2 weeks, and then there was another 2 weeks before they called in the RCMP. So that money was gone. And this is a thing that happens very, very often. It's not on the slide here, but just as an example, like the Bank of Bangladesh lost 800 million through that same process, and other organizations are falling for the same things as well. These are some of the things that get stolen as part of the theft. The big part of it is customer private information. It's a huge concern because this actually will play into legislation that's coming down the line in the next couple of years in Canada alone. And this is information that you really need to be aware of, actually, because it's very, very important. But this is the breakdown of what the type of data is that's stolen. Now, the thing about this, as I mentioned before, is that if this data is stolen as a part of a ransomware criminal act, they're going to ask you for payment as a ransom in order to return this information. And again, if you don't pay the ransom, they'll just put this stuff on the dark web, and then they'll end up making money like that, just with that. I mentioned Verizon earlier. These are highly summarized from these documents. They're really, really extensive reading, actually, a lot of detail. But I cherry pick things in there I think are really, really important to understand sort of generally. So 80% of breaches within hacking involve brute force or lost or stolen credentials. The brute force aspect of it, this has been around for a long time. There's lots of different ways that this can be done, but it's basically, you know, you have an encyclopedia-sized list of usernames and passwords, and you just use a scripting tool and you just hammer away at different systems until you get the right combination of username and password, and then you're in. And an example of that I'll be able to show you in a later thing. You may not know this, but this is actually really true. 60% of breaches involving SMBs actually go out of business 6 months after a major attack. And it's easy to understand how this can happen, because even though you may think that people are not interested in you, these hackers are very interested in small to medium-sized companies because they represent an easier target. And even if you don't have, you think you don't have anything that they may be interested in, what you do have are anything that's plugged into your network. What they can do is to hack these systems, and then what they do is they connect them up to what they call a botnet. And so you become a part of a major network of devices that have been compromised, which are then in turn used to compromise other companies as well. And if you're responsible for taking down a big organization, you know, the liability around that could be devastating for you as a company, along with reputational damage as well. I've seen a lot of companies, there's only 10 people in there, they have multi-million-dollar contracts with really big organizations. You suffer a breach and they're not very tolerant about things like that. And so, you know, your contracts could be in jeopardy, and recovering from that is really, really difficult. And so these are some of the things that can happen to small to medium-sized organizations. I wanted to talk on talk about the subject of, you know, who are these people behind the scenes? Like, how do they perpetrate these things? How do they get away with what they're doing? And just a quick lesson on what the World Wide Web is. What is the internet? The internet is actually based on 3 different areas within that. The area that we live in on a day-to-day basis is called the World Wide Web. And what defines that is anything that's indexable. So, you know, when you go onto Google and you say, you know, I want to see the pets near me, Google's already indexed the whole world. It already knows where you live. It already knows all the pet stores in your area, or veterinarians or whatever, and it will bring up all of those businesses that are, you know, in and around the area where you are. Where Google and all these other search engines do not live is in the deep web and the dark web. So there's no such thing as a search engine there. If you go in there looking for anything specifically, I'm not going to name, you know, some of these things are pretty obvious, things that you wouldn't typically find in, you know, in the World Wide Web. If you're looking for things that are, you know, kind of outside what we would call social norms, this is the area where you need to go. But in order to find those things, you have to know the exact addresses of the stores that contain all this, all of these things that you can buy. So you absolutely have to know these things. And a lot of ways you get that is you have to join these hacker forums, and that's where you can find information about these things. And so in the deep web and the dark web, you can see it represents from this iceberg is the majority of the internet. The area where we live is a very small amount. Just to give you an example of what it looks like, if you do happen to be if you're bored and want to have a look at the dark web and see what's up for sale, This is actually a real example of what a marketplace looks like in the dark web. You can see the way it's designed here is to be very user-friendly. The people that actually create these things have full technical support. Anything that you want to buy off of here, if you're looking for some early Christmas present ideas, want to look at for something a little bit different, this is where you can find some kind of, outside of the social norms type things. One of the items that they sell in here is, again, to what Jaka brought up earlier, is about these RDP connections. These RDP connections, you can see here for as low as $3.50. You can go in here and buy a bucket load of these things as a cyber criminal. And basically what it is here's the IP address, here's the username, here's the password. You buy a bucket of these things and you go and put them in your little script, and boom, you're into 100 organizations in a day. And then that's how they perpetrate the use of ransomware, among other things as well. But this is really where, when you see in the news, 1 billion IPs or credentials that were stolen, this is literally where they'll end up on these different marketplaces. The thing to really understand and appreciate about these criminal organizations is that they are highly organized, they're highly structured, and they're highly motivated and highly financed. In the cybersecurity world, it's not really the case in a lot of ways. And there are reasons for that, because a lot of times it's, in our case, like not everybody really knows what to do in order to defend themselves in a cybersecurity scenario for their organizations. And so one of the things that you'll never hear from them is, we don't have budget for this, because they'll throw money at anything. One of the areas they pay big bounties for is if you're a fantastic coder and you can create malware, they'll pay you up to $100,000 for your malware. They have no concerns around paying big money for these bounties for people to write code for them. This graph here, this was not off the internet. I didn't download this from somewhere. I had to actually assemble this myself based on the research that I did. These cyber criminal organizations, what you're looking at here is basically looks the same as you as a business owner and your organization. This is exactly how they look. They have a CEO, CIO, CFO, CTO. They have HR, and they have a whole other list of groups that combine together to create these what we call ransomware as a service, or malware as a service, or cyber criminality as a service. One of the interesting things that I found on here actually was, and explained something that we see outside in the world, is they actually have a QA department. And the idea with these guys is the coding engineers create the malware and then they hand them over to the QA department. What those guys do is they'll actually run the malware through all of the top antivirus vendors in the world to make sure that none of those engines can pick up either ransomware or whatever the malware is that they're creating. They actually do a lot of QA testing before this stuff is sent out there. So it's not a spray and pray where it's like you make it, send it out, hope it doesn't get picked up. There is a method to their madness, and it's highly structured in the way they do this. So hence the reason why we have this thing called 0 days, which is basically every antivirus vendor in the world has never seen this virus, and so they don't have a code to actually detect and eradicate it. And the way typically antivirus vendors work is that once they've seen the virus and they're able to decode it, then they can write something to respond to that. But these guys go out of their way to make sure. And the unfortunate thing is that they can produce this and recreate these things dozens of times a day. And so it keeps the antivirus vendors on their toes. Just a few examples of things that have been happening recently, trying to explain, why these things happen the way they do. If you're not familiar with the SolarWinds hack, there's about 18,000 customers around the world that are using the technology they have called Orion. And what the cyber criminals are able to do, which is in this case was a nation state, they actually managed to get into where the code was actually produced for sending updates to the applications themselves, where it could be feature updates, or it could be a security updates, or a combination of both. What they did was they managed to inject their code into those updates. And so when the company sent those updates out, they now compromised 18,000 systems around the world. And it basically provided a backdoor into the organizations. The thing that's really of concern is that, as I found out recently, this actually happened at the beginning of 2019, was only detected at the end of 2020. So again, there's a failure in the cybersecurity, because it doesn't really matter how somebody gets malware into your organization, there should be a way for you to detect that behavior, particularly these types of organizations. A lot of them are government institutions. There are lots of organizations that are involved in providing services to the Department of Defense. They're obviously lacking the security readiness that they require at their levels. So that was how that was compromised. And something closer to home, everybody's familiar with the CRA and the hack that took place from there. This was a scenario where, when I was reading this, I'm kind of shaking my head going, I just can't believe that these guys fell for this. It's just unreal, because as everybody knows, or everybody should know, what users tend to do is they use the same credentials over and over and over and over again for the many different services that they use. So the same username and password is on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's on all of these social media accounts, and in a lot of cases, they actually use the corporate email domain name and the same password for all of these accounts. And so what the hackers were able to do is they bought, credentials off the dark web, as I showed you just now. They put them into this script. And what the script does is it basically runs all over the planet, looking at every login available on the planet, looking for hits. What they found was there were tens of thousands of accounts that they were able to access through CRA because people were using the same username credentials for their CRA accounts as well. So there's a couple of things there. One is that, bad on the users, because people shouldn't be using the same credentials, especially, you wouldn't do this with a bank. So why would you do it with your CRA account? But on the other hand, like the CRA has accountability for this, because they should really have had multi-factor authentication in place. It should have been a case where whatever the username password was that you use should be accompanied with another factor of authentication to make sure that when you access these accounts, that you have that other level of security. One of the things that I read as part of the postmortem on this, which again, I was kind of shaking my head, was that, user adoption was really slow. Oh, really? The banks managed it. They've been doing this for years. It's not a case of, do you want to do it, Mr. User? It's a case of you have to do it, because the details in these things are so sensitive. They actually garner and equate to a lot of money for these hackers, because as I mentioned before, they put these on the dark web, and all of this data has certain different amounts of value, but they can get these things in en masse, and that's how they make their money. And so, all of a sudden, you go on your CRA account, they're using third-party authentication to coincide with the credentials that you use initially to get onto your CRA account. So it's kind of like, why didn't you do this years ago? This is really national security level information that's in here. Anyway, they finally got around to doing it, and so that's what you see now. Actually, this is just so you know, there's this concept of hack back. If you happen to notice somebody hacking your systems, you're not allowed to go after them. You're not allowed to figure out who it is that's hacking your systems, because it could create an international incident, just so you know that. FireEye actually did that on behalf of the US government to find these guys that were hacking into companies in North America, including Canada as well, in the North American thing. And so what they did was this thing called hackback, where they popped back onto the systems of these guys that were hacking companies over here, and they managed to get into their laptops, and they took pictures of them. They were in there for months looking at the hackers. They took pictures, made recordings, and then handed that information to the DOJ. Not recommended. Like I said, you can cause an international incident, so just better just read about it. We have this thing's called the WASP. It's AI-based driven technology, and it's actually we could fly this thing up to a 40 stories or 100-story building, park it outside the actual offices where we go, and it would just go about its ability to be able to hack into your systems. The capabilities that these hackers have today, because of AI and the use of drones and stuff, just gives them way more capabilities in terms of being able to penetrate your systems. We used to be a situation where a guy would pull up outside your offices. If you hired a pen tester, for instance, they'd pull up outside in the car and they'd sit there and try and hack into your Wi-Fi and stuff. Now they can just sit in the park somewhere, send a drone to do the work, and they can just sit there and do whatever they need to do. The drone will go and it will report back and say, hey, I found all the passwords and everything that I need. It's I'm not suggesting that this is something that would necessarily happen to anybody here in Canada just yet, but it's just to really give you an idea of the extent and capabilities that really exist out there. This is sort of the closing part of the presentation. I just wanted to cover this off real quick because hacking you is something that these guys are obviously very, very good at. I just wanted to give you a quick example of what I mean about the hacking you. There's a site called Shodan. I have an account on there. What this has is an index of everything that exists in the world that's plugged into the internet. There are people out there that are constantly scanning what's going on in the world. Every single organization, every single facility, every IoT device, everything exists on this particular site. And you can go in there and do some searches for different, who has an RDP port open, what services does this particular organization have. You could put in an organization name and it will come up with everything that's found about that organization. So just to give you a quick example of what I did with this was I just put in a search for cameras. And here's an example of an IoT camera. It's sitting on the internet. This person who owns this camera didn't put in change the username and password from when they bought it. I just looked up on the internet to find out what the default username passwords were, and boom, I was in. I then took the IP address of the camera and figured out where in the world this camera was actually sitting, and then did a virtual tour of the neighborhood to find the building. This is how cyber criminals can extensively research different people. And imagine I could actually sit there, studying your life patterns, learning to understand who's coming in and out, what times you're coming in and out, or from your location. And unfortunately, these things are going all the time in the world. The point being is that we really have to pay more attention to really what's going on with the technologies that we use, how we implement them. We have to make sure that we're covering our bases in terms of what we're doing, because there are a lot of people out there that have really nothing else to do but research this type of stuff for not the benefit of mankind. So I want to close off with this. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this thing called a pineapple. It's really to stress the reason why you should never use your laptop or cell phones in a coffee shop or some other thing where there's free Wi-Fi. For doing company business or for doing anything that's personal. If you're just browsing because you're looking for the next deal, in a store, maybe in the mall that you're in, not a problem. But anywhere where you're using usernames, credentials to get onto anything that's really sensitive, you should never use it, including even if you're using your cell phone's data plan and not the wireless in the store. What this device is designed to do, and it's very small, fits in a small backpack. Somebody can carry it on the side of their belt. The idea with this is it can act as an actual cell tower. So your phone is always looking for what is the nearest, strongest cell tower that I can find. And they go, oh, look, there's one right here, but 3 feet away from me. Isn't that amazing? It starts using this device as the cell tower. So the person sitting there is now able to siphon off everything that you're doing. Every credential that you put in, even if, I'm not going to go into the technicalities of this, but yes, websites use encryption, but what they do is initially when you just put in, abc.com, you're initiating an unencrypted session. That's what this is designed to do. For your convenience, wherever you're going to will then switch you to the encrypted session. But prior to that, you're actually initiating an unencrypted session, and that's what this picks up. And so it will finish the encrypted session on the other half of that communication, but everything between you and it is all unencrypted. So all of your credentials, company information, all of your bank details, everything that you could possibly use will end up in this thing. We can even put a fake website on there for the store that we're sitting in. So you go in there and say, oh, you can get free Wi-Fi and a free coffee. Just put in your username and password. But you're compromised. One of the other things you may not know is the idea around the SSIDs that are in your house that you use personally. Those are picked up by those Google vans that drive around recording the streets. And so there is a website that you can go on actually and look for SSIDs and look up the area where you live. There's a lot of things that are out there that you really need to be careful of. I'm just being conscious of the time here actually right now. I wanted to talk about there's updated privacy laws coming in Canada in the next couple of years. There's going to be a lot of stringent penalties related to this as well for not following along. And Canada really has no choice to do this because they have to fall in line with the California privacy laws as well as GDPR, which exists in Europe right now. And the penalties are going to be in the millions is really where they're going with this. And they really have no choice because the European Commission actually does a study of countries that they do business with to look at the level of security that these countries have. And the last time they did it for Canada, we basically barely scraped by, within the limits of the tolerance that they have. Now, the cybersecurity world has this thing we call, it's almost a guidebooks for security. Security is not expensive, actually, if you follow these practices. One of the areas, what you really need to build is a strategic roadmap in order to figure out, what you need to do in terms of introducing good security practices. One of the frameworks that we use for security is from the CIS, which is Center for Internet Security, and it covers a bunch of areas that you really need to look at in terms of, what should I be aware of in my organization to make sure that I'm reducing risk and increasing my security. The idea with this is that if you follow these tenets that they produce here, it'll stop you from doing this kind of shoot from the hip strategy that most organizations are using in order to develop good security practices. It's one of the reasons why companies are failing is because they're really kind of, let's try this, let's try that. Oh, that didn't work. Let's do something else. What you need to have is structure, a prioritization, and a kind of a discipline around security. This stuff is already figured out. All of the enterprise organizations are already using this as a way to secure their networks. And as a business owner, it's a way of being able to task the IT group, security group, to come up with a plan that actually will explain how you're securing that environment and getting the best use of the funds available to make these things happen. And this is something that I talk to organizations all the time. One of the areas that we've been able to figure out with these frameworks is, from a foundational basis, the very minimum things that you should be doing are listed right here. The Center for Internet Security is a globally recognized standard. If you have offices all over the world, any auditor in any of those countries, if you tell them you're following CIS as a standard, they all know what that is. It's not something that's specific to Canada or the US. It's a globally recognized standard. And it's actually freely downloadable from this particular website here. It's the cissecurity.org. I would highly recommend that you take a look at this or have your IT people take a look at this as a way to secure your environment and provide more of a structured approach to that. And at the end of the day, it's just a journey. Really, really important to understand that at a high level, these are really the things that you need to do. You need to assess your environment to understand where the gaps are compared with what the industry is recommending. And then you roll that into the remediation steps of things that make sense for your organization. So, even though there's 18 things here, not every one of those may be applicable for your organization, but it's good to go through the exercise to figure out where the gaps are in there and then determine what the best categories are for your organization and what makes sense. But at the end of the day, it is really just a journey. You do the assessment to get an understanding of where your risks are. You create a plan to be able to remediate those risks, and then you roll that into some kind of a management program. So, like your IT are actually managing your systems right now, being able to roll this into the day-to-day management of the security along with the IT should just be part of the regular process that you have. This is a process that enterprise organizations are already using. This is not a proof of concept, but in the small to medium space, this is not something that's been widely adopted as yet. But the reason why these enterprises do it is because they don't want to spend money where they don't need to. They need to understand where is the box, like where do we define security and how do we spend the money to get the most effective use of the funds and the best ways to reduce risk. And so I've been teaching these sorts of things for the last 20 years, actually. They've evolved over time and they really do work. Just very lastly, one of the companies I built this for originally almost 20 years ago, they have about 800 locations in Ontario. They're the largest importer of wines and spirits in the world. And I acted as their virtual CISO for about 11 years and used this very same methodology to be able to secure their environment. And for almost 20 years, they've never had a breach. And so I know this works. And that is it.
All right, thank you so much, Ken. That was, I think, speaking for the audience here, that was simultaneously fascinating but terrifying. So thank you for kind of going over there what we can do to approach cybersecurity following the CIS framework, what we need to look at in terms of a foundational piece, because I know seeing all of those different areas to cover can be a little bit overwhelming. So appreciate you breaking it down into the kind of core pieces and the areas that we need to look at securing, as well as the kind of roadmap of how we get there. Everyone, if you have more questions about security and everything.
There is one actually from Stefan. Would you propose actual solutions? So, you know what? That's a really, really excellent question, and because we get asked that, have been asked that quite a lot. So the way it works is this. Say, for instance, we Able One has the capabilities to help you with everything from end to end. The way it works is the initial assessment that you do is really just an assessment. It's not an audit. An audit is, okay, do you have this? Yeah, okay, well, show me evidence that you have this. Whereas an assessment is, do you have this? And you go, yes, we go, yeah, he said yes. And so we just put that down and that's it, because we don't want to go through this really arduous process to figure this out initially, because otherwise it just makes it too daunting. And yes, we can absolutely help you to implement whatever changes you need in order to remediate the gaps within that. Now, once all that's completed, our recommendation is to then get a third-party auditor to come in and do an assessment, because what we would welcome is somebody who's completely independent. They come in and they go in, and they're the ones who say, okay, you say you're doing this, show me evidence of that. If we're not able to provide you the evidence, then that's bad on us, right? But our job is to make sure that you're completely and utterly set up to be able to meet that challenge. And so we just become a part of your team, because we're not doing the audit piece. It would be like having your CFO decide to do the audit on nobody does that, right? They bring in Deloitte or whoever to come in and do a proper financial audit. It's the same thing in the cybersecurity world, where you get an independent person to come in and do that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ken, there. And thank you for your presentation. I'm going to move along to the last presentation that we have planned for today. And actually, our last formal set of presentation, or our last presentation, is actually a panel where we will be discussing business resilience. So I'm going to bring our panelists onto screen right now. Great. Joining us for our panel on building business resilience today, we have with us Melissa Palmer from Veeam. Melissa is senior technologist, and we also have Walter Sacco from Zerto, and Walter is a global systems engineer at Zerto. So welcome to both of our panelists. We're excited to hear from you on business resilience, and as I promised the attendees a little bit earlier, we'll be talking a little bit about backup NDR. To begin, I want to start so that we're all on the same page by defining business resilience. So and I'm going to look to IDC Canada. You've heard us reference them a couple times in today's presentations. We look to them as a leader in the industry in terms of definitions, as well as doing surveys and thought leadership along what's trending in the industry. So based on IDC Canada, business resiliency is the ability for an organization to rapidly adapt to business disruptions, to not only restore business operations, but also to capitalize on changed conditions. So when I see this definition, I think about, I really see two goals when we're talking about business resilience that come to play in the conversation. So the first is about recovering, restoring, getting back up. But the other is, I'll call the more aspirational goal, I suppose, about being able to adapt and really, dare I say, future-proof. So let's start out today's discussion on that more base level goal where we're talking about just recovering from things that have taken us offline and have disrupted our business. So the first question I want to ask to you, Melissa, is what are some of the common causes of business disruptions that we're seeing, and really how prevalent are these types of issues?
Yeah, and when you talk about, business disruption, you always start with kind of the classics, right? Okay, some kind of natural disaster, something physically happened to my data center, right? The power went out, or the backup generator didn't work, or we had a hurricane. And then you could talk about things like hardware failure. Well, I lost my whole storage, right? What do I do now? I lost a rack in the data center, right? But then, there's things like, oh, my network provider had an issue and we lost a circuit. And there's just so many things. But I think the thing we hear about most prevalently today, which is in fact a disaster, is some sort of security incident, right? Ransomware is the big one, unfortunately, that we're seeing all over the news everywhere. And most of the customers I've been speaking to lately, that has been a major disruption for them, right? So there's kind of all this traditional disaster recovery stuff that we've dealt with for years and years, but now we're also taking a look at some of these cyber incidences. Well, these are also a disaster that we're going to need to recover from.
Absolutely, yeah. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's you hit the nail on the head, that everybody thinks that it's these fluke accidents that we really have to worry about controlling for, when really we're talking about really any source of unplanned downtime. Even if you want to, if you're doing some sort of DevOps activity and you want to be able to launch that in a controlled environment, all those types of things that we want to be thinking about in terms of business disruptions. The next question I want to put out there then is, what is it like for a business when you're experiencing a disruption and when you're down, and where are businesses struggling the most at those times to try to recover?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy when something happens, right? When you go down for whatever reason, I mean, people are human, right? They get nervous, adrenaline kicks in, and the first thing that most organizations try to do is figure out what is wrong, right? Did someone change something and just break something? Is this a wider event? Is this something that we can recover from quickly? Or is this actually something that we need to start executing our disaster recovery plans for, because we're going to be down for so long that we're going to violate RPOs and RTOs and SLAs, right? So the hardest part usually is figuring out what happened and declaring the disaster, right? And think of some of our tier 1 applications, right? They always need to be available for that, we might almost immediately declare a disaster because we can't be down for more than an hour. We can't be down for more than half an hour. So then it comes into the other tiers fall behind. We're probably going to focus on our tier 1 first, get that up and running, and then in parallel be saying, okay, how do we fix this issue? Is this something we can remediate, or do we need to continue with our disaster recovery plans? And then when it comes actually time to execute the DR plan, one thing that we always talk about is the people who wrote the DR plan might not be the ones executing it. So have these people actually executed this plan before? Have you actually been successfully testing disaster recovery? And if the answer is yes, we've been testing disaster recovery because we've automated the process, we're good to go, we hit our button and we recover, usually things are pretty calm. However, when it's those manual processes, well, maybe they kind of worked during the last test and we never really fixed them because we had other fires to fight. That's where I see a lot of the issues, right? When the disaster actually happens, we have these manual processes we have to follow, and the person's never done it before, or they've never tested successfully. And it's just so prone to human error because you're under so much pressure. It's human nature, right? That there's a disaster, I have to fix this. So the big struggle is usually deciding, is this a disaster? Should we declare and should we go forward? And then the actual recovery itself can be difficult if it hasn't been properly tested.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for going over all that. So in terms of, we have to be thinking about our RPOs and RTOs.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we heard about those earlier, just to remind everybody on the call right now. RPO is the recovery point objective. So that's, if you think about it, that's how much data you're going to end up losing in these cases. But a lot of what you've just spoken about is the experience of on the RTO side, which is the
actual time it takes you to recover those systems to operational again.
Exactly. Yeah, so the next question I'm going to ask you then is, we've started to talk about it a bit here. In the world of business continuity and recovery, two really big solutions kind of come top of mind for everyone. One is backup and the other is disaster recovery. Now, everybody's heard us already start to use this terminology, and a lot of people in the industry actually use it almost interchangeably. So I've heard something. Yeah, I've heard that that's maybe not the right approach. So I want to give us a chance to set the record straight on this one. Melissa, what's the difference between backup and disaster recovery?
So that's a thing that is commonly misconstrued, right? The word backup can be taken many different ways, but what we usually mean in a backup is a copy of your data, an extra copy, a backup copy in case something goes wrong, right? So the backup of your data. That's something that we all do in our environments, at least on a daily basis in most places. You know, you have a backup job, it runs, I have a backup, we're good to go. When we talk about recovery, there's a lot of different things to talk about, especially when we say disaster recovery, right? That ties into so many more things than just backup, right? Backup is a huge part of it, and that extra copy of your data in whatever form you have, it could be in fact driving your recovery, but disaster recovery is a lot bigger. It's the whole process that we need to follow from end to end to actually recover either our, you know, environment, our site, our application, whatever we've created those plans for. So backup feeds into the disaster recovery process, but disaster recovery process is a lot more than just backup, especially when we talk about those RPOs and RTOs that you mentioned before, right? The first step in any of this, if we're talking about disaster recovery, is making sure that we understand those for each application, right? How long can we be down? And how much data can we actually use? Those are all questions that need to be answered before you can go and kind of create that plan of, okay, how am I going to do it? Because that how I'm going to back up and recover things could be completely different based on your RPO and RTO, right? I would protect a mission critical application that has an RPO of 30 seconds much differently than I would protect an application where the RPO is 12 hours. So you really need to have that understanding up front to feed it into your disaster recovery process.
Absolutely. And just to note for everyone, we have Walter up here. Apologies for the technical issue there for a moment. Walter, I'm gonna give a couple questions over to you.
Welcome to the party.
For you to have the opportunity to speak as well. Walter, maybe you can you want to elaborate a little bit more and perhaps just share with us you know, what we need to have as kind of a baseline when we want to be prepared with some sort of disaster recovery business continuity plan. What are kind of some of the foundational elements maybe there that we should all be looking for in a solution?
Yeah, I think Melissa nailed it. There is a difference between backup and disaster recovery. And if you're using your backups, which, you know, typically are point in time, you know, things that you're going to keep for longer term, if you're using backups for disaster recovery, you're going to have longer RTO and longer RPOs, right? You're going to potentially lose a lot of data, whereas disaster recovery, you want to kind of keep it continuous. So you want to have the ability of constantly replicating that data across, so that if you have a power outage at your production site, at your DR site, you know, your data is only a little bit behind. So if you have a 4 o'clock disaster at production and you taking backups the night before, if they're located in that site, you've got no way to get those backups back up. If they're at the other site, at least, you know, you have a way to recover that. So you want to have a good mix, and exactly what she said with knowing your application. So how long can you
all ties back, right? It all ties back to
Yeah.
that RPO and RTO. You need to know how to protect the data and how critical it is, right?
Yep. Not everything needs to be protected,
No,
you know,
not at all.
every 5 seconds, right? So some things that are stagnant, you know, you can do a backup. If it's okay, the business is, you know, doesn't have that device for 12 hours, then, you know, protect it accordingly, right? You don't have to spend the money on infrastructure to have that replicating quickly.
This is perfect. So I'm actually going to jump ahead on a question here, just because I think we're leading into it nicely. I wanted to ask you guys about how we control costs for our backup and disaster recovery solutions, because I think everyone here is hearing, you know, has seen the cybersecurity threats. They've seen, you know, what we need to be thinking about in terms of trends. I think there's a kind of conception out there that backup and disaster recovery solutions, especially when you're, implementing best practices, can be a bit costly and cost prohibitive. So I want to throw it out to you guys. What are some of the things we can do to control costs? What are some of the kind of ways we work around these things to make these solutions affordable so that businesses can still have access to them without it, eating up too much of their budget? Melissa, maybe I'll ask you to focus in on the backup side of the solutions here and just kind of share some thoughts there.
Yeah, and I'm probably the first thing I would say is it really as expensive as you think you are? Because when you understand how much downtime you can sustain and the reason behind that, it might not be so expensive. For example, if I have a critical application where I lose $300,000 every hour it's down, right? That might be something I need to spend some money on to protect, because what is the actual cost of downtime? So it all comes back to those RPOs and RTOs and understanding the thresholds. Because like Walter said, something you back up every 12 hours, that's cheap. If it's a server that's not vital to your business and you can be down for 12 hours a day, a week, whatever, that you don't need to worry about. That's not the expensive part. When we start talking about, okay, my RPO is measured in seconds, my RPO is measured in minutes, I need to have everything up and running in 4 hours. That's when you need to start making the investment in basically your infrastructure, right? To be able to support both the protection of that data via whatever technology you're using, whether it's some sort of replication, and more importantly, the recovery of your data, right? Where am I actually going to recover that to? And if my RTO is very aggressive, I basically need to have the infrastructure there, right? If it's a 2-week RTO for our development systems, I mean, you could do a lot in 2 weeks. You could send it pretty much anywhere. But if we're talking mission critical, you need to have that infrastructure basically ready for you in the event of a recovery.
I'm glad you brought up the cost of downtime here in this conversation, because in this industry, when we're talking about architecture and engineering, I think we've seen the stats on this. You guys have some of the highest costs of downtime in terms of lost productivity for your teams, right? So, we know that you guys are generally charging hourly fees, and if your systems are down and your architects and engineers can't be working, that's a really hefty cost to be eating. On top of that, if you are rolling back to 24 hours ago and you've lost an entire day,
data loss is super critical in this engineering. And my background is actually in electrical engineering. So like, right, if we're talking about I've lost a day or I've lost work, and when I've made changes to, diagrams or workflows or whatever, or, we had all our engineers in a room and we redesigned this ASIC and we're good to go. But when we lose that is a tremendous cost.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing. And not knowing what you lost, right? So if someone says, whole site's down, we need to restore from backups. Well, you have to kind of remember what you did that whole day. And if you're working with a big team, everybody has to recreate that, but you're not starting from right where you came back from. You're starting from figuring out where you lost. Yeah, you're starting from behind. So the big thing for me comes into, total cost of ownership. What's the cost of the storage you need to protect this to? And what's the cost of the actual solution, right? And what's the cost of your outage? So when you kind of look at all those numbers, a $500,000 solution, if you're losing $300,000 every hour that you're down, one outage is going to kind of make that back. When you're talking about other things like how do we save money on that? I mean, most of the solutions out there offer, some sort of dedupability or compression. So you're going to be using less space for those backups, for those replica data, and there's a lot of options that go to the cloud as well. So utilizing the public cloud, while it may be scary if you're not in there at all now, the benefit of it is you don't have to buy your whole environment outright, and have that sunk cost just waiting for a disaster. You're only using the data that you're sending up there until you have a disaster. Then you bring everything up, and hopefully you can, resolve the issues that happened on your site, bring it all back down. And it's, a fraction of the cost that would have been if you had to purchase your own, colo somewhere.
Yeah, great notes there, guys. I do want to shift focus for a moment to just look at how this, how our discussion overlays with our discussion on security, specifically when it comes to ransomware, because I think everyone's terrified about ransomware these days. So I'd like to outline for everybody on the call today how these solutions, how they interplay, and what kind of coverage or help do they give you when it comes to a ransomware attack. Walter, I'll let you get this one first.
Yeah, so I think certainly backups and having a continuous data protection strategy is the way to go. I mean, if you Google ransomware businesses in the news, there's new ones every day, and it seems like it's happening more and more to higher profile people. And actually, and you got to think about the ones that people aren't talking about. So hopefully,
Yeah,
they had a
right.
solution that allowed them to get back online, and you don't hear about those. So those are the luck. I would like to hear some. Hey, we got ransomware, but we didn't lose anything. We didn't have to pay $30 million to get our data back. So with DR, having a warm site, you have the ability to continue operations at that new location pretty quickly. As soon as you get hit with that ransomware, you roll back to when you didn't. With backups, you've got the ability, most of the backup solutions have immutability options so that even if your whole environment gets infected, those backups are going to be secure. So if you have to rebuild everything, those backups are secure. You can restore those. And there's a lot of, public cloud locations that offer these immutability to kind of keep those out, having data. I mean, I'll say it, tape is a very secure option. You're not going to get
I think
ransomware on
wasn't
tape.
it was it Fujitsu or another company with tape kind of heritage that came out and said recently, yeah, we got ransomware and we recovered, we didn't pay a dime.
Recovered from tape. I know it's
Yeah.
it's an old school solution, but they're not going to get in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Melissa, any other thoughts on
Yeah,
ransomware? I know you
absolutely.
had-
And one thing I've been saying to people for probably the last year is your ransomware recovery plan can literally be your disaster recovery plan. Ransomware is a disaster. So now is the time to really look at your disaster recovery plan, because that can be your plan to recover from ransomware. So really a lot of what I've been working with my customers is, okay, let's get those plans up to snuff. Let's get them automated. Let's get them documented. Let's get all that automation in place. So and the testing in place, right? Let's test them. So when we have that ransomware disaster, we hit our go button and we're ready, right? So it's kind of a ransomware discussion really is so similar to disaster recovery discussion. And people sometimes want to put it in a separate category, but I'm like, no, this is a disaster. This is potentially your whole environment or a site level failure, right? I mean, hopefully if you're lucky, just one server gets ransomware, but we know it doesn't work that right? They usually get in there and you're done for. So really it hit hard. So the time is now to really put that effort into that planning. And it can be difficult, right? If you haven't actually had that discussion of what is the cost of downtime, what's my RTO, what's my RPO, now's the time to start.
Yep. And you mentioned something I think is very important is testing. So you buy the solution, you get it all set up. If you've never tested it, you're going to panic when that happens. So doing those tests, it's amazing how many customers we talk to where we're going in and they're like, okay, what are you doing now? How often do you test? Well, we did a test like 3 years ago, but a lot of things have changed. We haven't tested it. That blows my mind. So make sure you're doing those tests.
And Melissa spoke earlier to what it's like to be a business who's trying to recover from some sort of business disruption and the panic and people not knowing what they're doing. That's exactly to your point of why we need to be testing these solutions with some frequency and veracity here. For the last couple minutes, guys, and I don't mind going a couple minutes over with this panel, I just want to give us a little bit of time to talk about shifting our focus from what I've kind of deemed our base level goal of recovery to the more aspirational goal of what do we do to build an adaptable business that is flexible and agile. How do the solutions that we've been talking about today come into play? I'm going to turn it over, Walter. I'll send it back to you.
Sure, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of things to do. I think most of the solutions you're going to want some sort of software-based solution. They're a lot more agile. It doesn't require you to purchase equipment that gradually gets out of date, and then you'll fall behind. With software, you click a button and you update it. SaaS, containerized workloads, kind of moving to agile deployments. Having just your environment that you can quickly change, that's not going to cause a big issue. I think those are sort of the biggest things. I mean, I think of Kubernetes is like what VMware was to physical servers, right? When you had physical servers, you could run one thing on it. Then we got VMware and virtualization where you could put a bunch of VMs on one physical server. And now we've got Kubernetes where you can run individual services on VM. So we're just kind of cutting it down and you don't need a whole VM for a small service, right? So just staying up to date and keeping up to date with what options are out there.
Great. And Melissa, any thoughts on this conversation
Yeah,
as
just
well?
to kind of camp right onto that and automate everything you can, right? Automate everything. We need to remove the humans from the process, right? The humans are the ones who get nervous during a disaster, who mess things up, who hit the wrong button, right? Automate wherever you can. And, you know, there's still a lot of people that are hesitant to start the automation journey. It is a lot of work up front, especially if you don't actually know what's going on, right? How many of you have applications where it's still running and it's been running, but the person who designed it and implemented it is long gone, right? So actually kind of going back to those applications, taking a good hard look at them and saying, okay, what's our plan going forward? Are we going to build new? Or are we going to just keep on updating this? What are the processes that hook into this so we can begin automating them and take the work off of ourselves so we can actually do what matters to our business, right? So we can design more ASICs, so we can do more CAD drawings, right? So what can we do to get time back so that technology can become an innovative force in our organizations, not something that we just have to do to keep the lights on.
Exactly. If you have a server, if you have a Windows Server 2000 that you're running an application, because
probably do. Everybody has one.
Everybody's got that one server that has that little sticky note on, do not shut down, because no one knows what's going to happen if that happens. It's time to, you know, bring that up to date and get it something, you know, it might be a difficult process to go through, but it's going to save you in the long end. If that's running your business and that goes down, then you're out of a business. So you definitely want to keep your applications up to date. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Last question for our panelists today. If you guys had one key takeaway that you'd like everybody who's listening today to take away from what we've been talking about, what would you choose? Melissa, I'll let you answer first this time.
Please test your recovery. Test it in all the different ways. You know, test. You know, okay, I lost this server, I lost this file, I lost this document. And then test recovery from an event like a ransomware, right? Do those DR tests, those ransomware recovery tasks now, so you have time to fix them, so you don't end up be one of those stories in the news, basically.
That's the biggest thing I think for a company is doing testing, right? You have a solution. If you don't know how to use it or you've never used it, it's going to be just panic mode when you have to use it. So doing that testing and understand the architecture of your environment, understand the dependencies that you have between these servers. Because if there's something in there that you're not sure what it does, it always does something. If it goes down, you're like, oh, these things don't work. Kind of map out your environment and know, you know, these 7 VMs make up this application, kind of group them together and understand that in a disaster, I've got to fail over all of these. I'm not just.
And I might have to fail them over and bring them back in a certain order, right? It's not just bringing 7 online. I might have to do it in a certain order or nothing's going to work right.
Exactly. And that brings us back to testing. Test it. You'll figure out the order. And it'll just be a lot better if things do go wrong. Hopefully they never do, but if they do, it's much better to be prepared for that by having done the testing.
Great. So everyone, we need to know our environment. We need to come up with a plan. If we are not planning for disaster recovery and business disruptions, absolutely need to put some attention into that. And then we need to be doing some ongoing testing of those plans. I guess personally, if I could give everyone one thing to walk away from right now from this panel, ransomware, yes, everybody's terrified of it. The solutions we've heard about today in terms of backup and disaster recovery, they can take the sting out of your ransomware attack, right? So we've heard of businesses who can get back up and running, avoid paying ransom. I do want to emphasize though that in these cases, what you're losing in a ransomware attack is the privacy of the data. So if you refuse to pay that ransom, you're losing the privacy of that data. That's a different decision for businesses to make. But the key here is that there are solutions where you can be hit by ransomware, you can get back up and running without disruption to your operations. Again, you're losing the privacy of the data that you held, but again, your operational capabilities don't have to be affected. Melissa and Walter, thank you guys so much for joining this panel today and a great conversation. Thank you for joining us. Please do join us over in our Q&A virtual room and hope to see you there. And again, thanks to everyone for attending today.